Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxing History Time. Tonight we slip beneath the frozen earth into a world where the wind howls like a restless animal, and the ground itself becomes your only loyal ally. You stand on a plain glazed with frost breath rising in pale clouds, the air so sharp it almost tastes metallic. Snow crunches beneath your boots and the horizon looks endless and indifferent. It is beautiful in that quiet way winter can be. It is also merciless. You probably will not survive this, not without help. The cold does not simply nip at your cheeks. It seeps inward. It stiffens your fingers, dulls your thoughts, and makes even small tasks feel heroic. In pre-modern winters, before central heating and double-glazed windows, cold was not an inconvenience. It was a serious threat. Historical records from the Little Ice Age, roughly between the 14th and 19th centuries, show that European winters grew significantly harsher, with rivers like the Thames freezing solid during some years. That is a mainstream and well-documented fact. People skated on what is now usually flowing water, markets were held on the ice, and many quietly froze in unheated rooms. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, tell me where you are in the world and what time it is there. I love imagining all of us listening together across different nights and different seasons. Now dim the lights. You pull your cloak tighter and look at the land around you. There are no brick houses here, no chimneys puffing reassuring smoke, just wind carving its path over open ground. And yet somewhere beneath your feet there is warmth. Not blazing warmth, not tropical paradise warmth, but a steady, patient kind of warmth that does not care about the howling above. The earth even in winter holds a surprisingly stable temperature a few feet below the surface. Today you might call it thermal mass or geothermal buffering. Back then you simply called it survival. You kneel and press your palm against the frozen crust. It feels like stone. Hard, unyielding, but dig down far enough and the temperature evens out. It no longer swings wildly between day and night. The soil becomes a kind of blanket, and so across continents and centuries people discovered a simple truth. When the sky tries to kill you, go underground. Historians still argue whether this instinct was first driven more by climate necessity or by opportunistic use of existing caves. Some suggest early humans were primarily seeking shelter from predators, and only later realized the thermal advantage. Others believe the temperature stability was immediately obvious to anyone who had ever crouched in a shallow hollow during a storm. Either way, the pattern repeats again and again in human history. When winter sharpened its teeth, people dug. You imagine the first time someone tried it deliberately. The wind is screaming across a steppe. Snow stings your face like thrown sand. Your fire refuses to stay lit, so you scrape away the top layer of frozen soil. You hollow out a shallow depression. You pile earth around the edges to block the wind. It is crude. It is messy. But as you crouch inside, something changes. The air is calmer. The cold feels muted. The difference is subtle at first, then undeniable. It is quieter too. Sound behaves differently when you are partially wrapped in soil. The roar of the wind dulls to a distant moan. The world above becomes slightly abstract, like a memory rather than a present threat. You feel smaller, yes, but also safer. There is a slightly odd tidbit from early Arctic explorers who described indigenous earth-sheltered dwellings as feeling almost womb-like in their calmness. Some 19th century visitors even claim that stepping inside after a blizzard felt like entering another season entirely. A dramatic exaggeration perhaps, but you can understand the sentiment. After hours of exposure, even a few degrees of difference feels miraculous. You shift your weight and notice the smell. Damp soil, faintly mineral. A trace of smoke from a carefully tended fire. It is not the perfumed scent of modern life. It is honest and grounding. Your fingers previously numb begin to ache as circulation returns. That ache is uncomfortable. It is also reassuring. It means you are not freezing solid tonight. Above you, winter continues its performance. Snowdrifts, Branches creak. But down here you are participating in one of humanity's oldest architectural traditions. You're trusting the planet itself to shield you. Open-air shelters fail easily, tents flap, timber cracks, but Earth absorbs and redistributes energy slowly. Even without understanding physics equations, people learn through repetition. Digging required effort. It meant time and labour when energy was already scarce. Yet communities kept doing it. That tells you something important. You picture a small group huddled in a shallow pit house thousands of years ago. Their tools are simple: stone, bone, wood. They line the walls with whatever they have. Hides woven mats, branches. The roof might be partially covered with earth and sod. It is not pretty by modern standards. There are no glass windows or decorative beams, but inside breath does not immediately crystallize in the air. There is also a psychological shift that comes with going below ground. When the sky is grey and relentless, it can feel as though the entire universe is hostile. Descending even a few feet changes your relationship with that vastness. The ceiling lowers, the space becomes intimate, the threat feels containable. Some fringe theories have suggested that early underground dwellings were inspired by a kind of spiritual desire to return to the Earth Mother during harsh seasons. It is a poetic idea. Archaeologists tend to be cautious about such interpretations, preferring practical explanations. Still, it is tempting to imagine that survival and symbolism blended together in ways we cannot fully untangle. You lie back against the packed soil wall. It is cool but not piercing. Your fire crackles softly in a central hearth. Smoke finds its way out through a small opening above. The design is imperfect. Smoke sometimes lingers too long, moisture can accumulate. There are trade-offs always. But compared to standing unprotected under a winter sky, this is luxury. Outside, someone who refuses to adapt might succumb to hypothermia in a matter of hours. That is not melodrama. It is physiology. Core body temperature drops. Judgment falters, sleepiness creeps in, and sleep in that context is dangerous. Down here, tucked into the embrace of soil, you tilt the odds slightly in your favour. It is not heroism, it is not much grand architecture yet. It is instinct refined by mesity. You listen to the faint thud of snow sliding off the ground above. Each sound is softened by the layers of dirt. You realise something quietly profound. The earth that grows your food in summer becomes your shield in winter. The same ground that feels lifeless and frozen on the surface holds steady warmth below. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine countless generations making the same choice. Dig down, settle in, wait out the storm. In the chapters ahead of this long human story, you'll find this pattern repeating in different shapes and materials. Stone-lined pits, turf-covered halls, entire cities carved beneath rock. But for now, it begins simply. You the cold and the ground beneath your hands. The wind above continues to rage. Down here you breathe slowly. The earth does not hurry. It does not panic. It simply holds you patient and quiet as winter passes overhead. You wake to a dim grey light filtering through the mouth of a cave, the air inside cool but not cruel. Outside, frost clings to the rocks in delicate patterns, and the wind combs through the valley with a low, steady hum. You're not in a built house. You have not shaped timber beams or stacked bricks. Instead, you are wrapped in stone that was ancient long before you arrived. Natural caves were among the earliest winter refuges used by human communities. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Lascaux in France and Shanidar in present-day Iraq shows that prehistoric people occupied caves for extended periods. That is a widely accepted historical fact supported by layers of tools, hearth remains and food debris. These were not accidental overnight stops. They were seasonal homes. You shuffle closer to the embers of a small fire. Smoke drifts upward and stains the ceiling in faint dark streaks. The smell is sharp but comforting. It lingers in your hair and clothes. The cave walls feel slightly damp to the touch, cool stone pressing against your palm. Yet the temperature inside barely shifts compared to the biting air beyond the entrance. You notice how the wind changes as it reaches the cave mouth. Outside it shrieks and swirls, inside it softens to a murmur. The deeper you move into the chamber, the quieter it becomes. Sound is swallowed by stone. It is as if the world has lowered its voice out of respect. Some researchers believe that early humans may have chosen caves primarily for safety from predators. Lions and hyenas were not imaginary threats. However, others suggest climate stability played an equally important role. Scholars continue to debate which factor weighed more heavily in those first decisions. Perhaps it was not a single reason at all. Perhaps it was the simple relief of stepping into a space where the cold loosened its grip. You sit near the entrance and look out at a frozen landscape. Snow dusts the ground in thin layers, and the sky hangs low and pale. In the distance, you can almost imagine herds moving slowly across the plain. Inside the cave, though, there is a sense of containment. The ceiling curves overhead like a protective hand. There is a quirky detail that often surprises modern listeners. Some prehistoric caves show evidence of deliberate airflow management. At certain sites, archaeologists have found hearths placed strategically near entrances likely to draw smoke outward through natural drafts. It suggests that even without formal engineering knowledge, people observed how air moved and adapted accordingly. You might call it practical genius born from cold fingers and watery eyes. You stretch your legs and feel the packed earth beneath you. It is firmer than open ground, protected from frost heave by the overlying rock. Your sleeping area is layered with hides. They are not plush, but they trap body heat effectively. When several people sleep close together, warmth accumulates. You can feel it in the subtle shift of air as others stir nearby. The cave does not glow with golden warmth. It is not a tropical retreat, but compared to the open plain, it is a sanctuary. The temperature remains relatively constant year-round, buffered by thick stone. Even today, if you step into a deep cave in winter, you will notice the difference immediately. The air may feel cool, but it is stable. Stability is everything when survival hangs in the balance. You imagine how knowledge of such places spread. Perhaps a family returns to a valley year after year because they know the cave will not betray them. Children grow up associating its dark entrance with safety. Stories form around it. The cave becomes more than shelter. It becomes memory. There is also evidence that some cave dwellers marked their walls with paintings and carvings. The famous cave art of Upper Paleolithic Europe often depicts animals in vivid motion. While many scholars interpret these images as ritual or symbolic expressions, others have suggested a more practical angle. Some argue the art may have strengthened group identity during long winter confinements. Historians still argue whether these paintings were primarily spiritual acts or social glue in harsh seasons. Either way, imagine the comfort of colour and narrative flickering in firelight while snow piles high outside. You lie back and watch shadows dance across the uneven ceiling. The flicker of flames animates stone surfaces. For a moment, the cave feels alive. It breathes with you. The faint drip of water somewhere deeper within echoes softly. Each sound is magnified in the hush. There is, of course, a trade-off. Caves can be damp, water seeps through cracks, smoke can accumulate if the fire is poorly placed, and not every cave is safe from rockfall. Survival here requires attentiveness. Yet compared to constructing a shelter from scratch in freezing wind, adapting a natural formation is efficient. You run your fingers along the wall and feel tiny mineral ridges. Stone stores heat slowly and releases it slowly. During the day, even weak winter sunlight warming the entrance can contribute a little to the interior climate. At night, that stored energy fades gradually, rather than vanishing instantly as it would in open air. There is something psychologically grounding about stone. Timber creaks, fabric flutters, but rock feels immovable. In a world where storms arrive without warning and temperatures plunge unpredictably, that solidity offers reassurance. Some fringe theories have proposed that certain prehistoric caves were selected for acoustic properties enhancing chants or communal sounds during winter gatherings. While the evidence remains speculative, acoustic studies in modern times have shown that some painted chambers do indeed carry sound in unusual ways. Whether this was intentional or coincidental remains open to interpretation. Scholars continue to examine these possibilities with cautious curiosity. You watch as someone feeds another small branch into the fire. Sparks leap briefly, then settle. The warmth spreads outward in gentle waves. Close enough to the flames, your cheeks flush. A few steps away, the air remains crisp. The balance must be managed carefully. Too large a fire risks smoke and wasted fuel. Too small and the cold creeps back in. Outside, a gust of wind sweeps snow across the cave mouth. You see it swirl like pale smoke against darker stone. It cannot reach you here. Not fully. You're buffered by geology millions of years in the making. Caves were not a universal solution. Many regions lack them entirely, but where they existed, they offered a powerful advantage during winter months. Generations learned to read the landscape not just for food and water, but for cavities in rock that promise thermal stability. You shift closer to the entrance and feel the boundary between two worlds. Behind you cool, steady air. Before you sharp cold that bites the inside of your nose. The difference is subtle but life-changing. It begins to make sense why long before formal architecture humans embraced the underground in its most natural form. You do not need mortar or blueprints, you need awareness, you need the humility to follow the contours of the land. As the day fades, the light at the cave mouth softens. Shadows lengthen across the floor. You pull your hides tighter and lean back against ancient stone. The fire crackles quietly, its warmth held and moderated by the walls around you. Above ground, winter prowls. Inside, in this hollow carved by time you endure, you leave the cave behind and step into a world that feels even older, even more exposed. The wind moves freely across a vast ice age plain, carrying fine snow that skims low over the ground like restless spirits. There are no convenient rock chambers here, no ready-made shelters waiting in stone. If you want warmth, you will have to build it. Or rather, you will have to dig for it. You crouch beside a shallow depression already half-formed by previous hands. The soil is hard at the surface, crusted with frost, but beneath that brittle layer it softens slightly. Your tools are simple. A shaped piece of bone, a stone scraper, your fingers themselves. It is slow work. Yet as the hollow deepens, the wind seems to lift just a little above your head, gliding over the edge instead of striking you full force. During the Upper Paleolithic period, archaeological sites across parts of Eastern Europe and Siberia reveal semi-subterranean dwellings built from mammoth bones, timber and packed earth. This is a mainstream archaeological finding supported by excavations at places like Mazhiriki in Ukraine, where circular structures made of mammoth bones were partially sunk into the ground. These were not temporary windbreaks. They were carefully arranged homes designed to endure bitter winters. You lower yourself into the pit and feel the difference immediately. Even before walls are fully erected, the earth around you blocks lateral wind. Snow does not swirl directly into your face. The air feels less aggressive. It is a small shift, but in sub-zero temperatures, small shifts matter. Around the rim of the depression, curved mammoth bones are set upright, forming a skeletal frame. The ivory arcs overhead like the ribs of some enormous creature. Hides are stretched across this frame, then weighted down with soil and snow. The result is both organic and engineered. It smells faintly of animal fat, of smoke, of damp ground. There is something quietly astonishing about using the bones of an Ice Age giant to shield yourself from the same climate that once sustained it. A slightly quirky detail often noted by archaeologists is that some of these mammoth bone dwellings contained carefully arranged skulls placed at entrances or along walls. Whether this was structural reinforcement, ritual symbolism, or simply efficient use of available material remains debated. Researchers still dispute the precise balance between practicality and spiritual meaning in these designs. You settle near the center where a hearth will be lit. Fire becomes the heart of the space. The pit design helps contain and reflect heat. earth piled along the sides acts as insulation, slowing the escape of warmth. The roof of hides and soil traps rising heat that would otherwise vanish into the open sky. When the first flames flicker to life, smoke curls upward and finds a small opening left intentionally at the biki core. It does not always behave perfectly. Sometimes it lingers, makes your eyes sting, but with careful tending the airflow stabilizes. You begin to understand how observation becomes architecture. Each winter teaches adjustments. Raise the walls slightly higher. Angle the entrance away from prevailing winds. Dig a little deeper next time. You press your palm against the inner wall where earth meets bone. It feels firm and slightly warmer than the air above ground. Soil has a cool weight. It resists rapid temperature swings. Even as night falls and the cold intensifies, the temperature inside drops slowly rather than plunging all at once. Outside, the landscape is wide and merciless. Snow stretches to the horizon in pale undulations. The sky turns a deep metallic blue as dusk settles. Inside your semi-buried dwelling, shadows flicker across curved ivory beams. The space feels intimate, contained. When several bodies gather within, warmth accumulates in layers. Breath moistens the air. You can smell hide smoke and the faint tang of frozen earth thawing slightly near the fire. Some anthropologists have suggested that these pit houses represent one of the earliest deliberate uses of passive insulation. Of course, no one at the time would have used that phrase. They simply noticed that digging down reduced exposure. Still, historians continue to discuss whether these structures were used year-round or primarily during the harsher seasons. Evidence of seasonal occupation varies from site to site, leaving room for interpretation. You lie back on a bedding of grasses and hides. Above you, the roof curves low. You can almost reach it with an outstretched hand. The closeness is comforting rather than claustrophobic. The wind roars outside, but here it is reduced to a distant vibration. There is a subtle acoustic change as well. Snow begins to accumulate on the roof, adding another layer of insulation. Each flake that lands becomes part of your shield. The world above is building your protection without even knowing it. Sound dampens further. The dwelling grows quieter as the storm intensifies. It's fascinating to consider how knowledge travelled in these communities. Perhaps one group observed another's pit design and adopted it. Perhaps improvements spread gradually through shared winter camps. Some fringe hypotheses even propose that certain construction patterns hint at complex social coordination beyond simple family units. While evidence for large-scale planning remains limited, the precision of some excavated dwellings suggests careful communal effort. You shift closer to the fire and feel warmth radiate outward, reflecting off packed earth walls. Your toes, once numb from digging, begin to tingle painfully as circulation returns. It is not pleasant, but it is proof of life. There is also a practical advantage in being partially below ground when it comes to fuel. Smaller fires can maintain livable temperatures because less heat escapes through exposed walls. Wood and animal fat are precious resources in frozen landscapes. Efficiency becomes survival. You imagine stepping outside for a moment. The cold hits like a solid object. Your breath freezes at the edge of your scarf. The wind slices through any exposed seam. Then you duck back down into the pit, pulling aside the hide covering the entrance. Instantly, the air feels calmer. The contrast is almost startling. These semi-subterranean homes represent a turning point. You are no longer relying solely on natural caves. You're shaping the earth itself. You're learning that the ground can be partner, not obstacle. As the fire burns low and night deepens, you listen to the faint creak of bone under the weight of snow. It holds steady. Around you, others sleep in close proximity, their breathing steady and rhythmic. Outside, winter continues its relentless sweep across the plain. Inside this shallow embrace of soil and ivory, you endure another night. Seasons pass ice retreats in some regions, and you find yourself in a very different landscape. The glaciers no longer dominate the horizon, yet winter still arrives with a firm hand. You're part of one of the first farming communities living in a clearing edged by forest. The fields you tend in summer now lie stiff and silver beneath frost. The wind is less apocalyptic than in the Deep Ice Age, but it remains sharp enough to sting. This time you're not improvising with mammoth bones. You are planning. You stand over a rectangular outline scratched into the soil. The earth here is workable, not permanently frozen. With wooden tools and patient labour, you and your neighbours dig a pit about a metre deep. The removed soil is not discarded. It is banked around the edges, forming low protective walls. Timber posts are set into the corners. A light frame rises above, then is covered with reeds, branches, and finally a layer of earth. What emerges is known to modern archaeologists as a pit house, a common feature in many Neolithic settlements across Europe and parts of Asia. Excavations at sites such as those belonging to the linear band ceramic culture in Central Europe reveal sunken floors paired with post holes that once supported simple roofs. These are not guesses from folklore. They are physical traces mapped carefully in soil discolorations and preserved impressions. You step down into the finished space. The floor lies slightly below ground level. That small difference changes everything. The wind no longer sweeps directly across your body. The soil walls mute temperature extremes. Even before a fire is lit, the air feels steadier than in a structure raised entirely above the surface. You run your hand along the packed earthen wall. It is dry for now, though in wetter seasons moisture can seep in. A central hearth is prepared, ringed with stones blackened by use. Smoke will escape through a small opening in the roof. It is imperfect ventilation, but it works well enough when managed carefully. It's interesting that similar semi-sunken homes appear independently in distant regions. From Central Europe to parts of East Asia, early agricultural societies use comparable designs. Some researchers propose that this reflects a shared practical response to climate rather than cultural diffusion. Others suspect there may have been more contact between communities than previously assumed. The question remains open, and each new excavation adds a piece to the puzzle. You sit on a low wooden bench set against the wall. Above you the roof slopes gently, its thatch thick with insulating material. A thin layer of soil on top adds weight and thermal buffering. When winter deepens and snow settles across the roof, it forms an additional barrier against the cold. You can almost hear it building your shelter layer by layer. There is a small, slightly unexpected detail that has amused some archaeologists. At certain Neolithic sites, pit houses contain traces of storage pits within the floor itself. Smaller hollows, used to keep food cool and protected. It means that even inside an already sunken home, people dug further downward for specific purposes. You smile at the thought. If digging once helps, why not dig twice? The smell inside is earthy but not unpleasant. Smoke mingles with the scent of dried grain stored in woven baskets. In the corner, tools rest against the wall, their wooden handles smooth from repeated use. You hear the faint rustle of wind brushing the outer roof, but it's softened, reduced to a gentle sigh. There is also a social dimension to these spaces. The lowered floor encourages closeness. People sit nearer to one another. Conversations feel contained. During long winter evenings, storytelling likely filled the air as steadily as smoke from the hearth. Some archaeologists have suggested that the architecture itself shaped communal behaviour, fostering intimacy in ways that above-ground halls might not. You stretch your legs and feel warmth radiating upward from the fire. The pit design allows heat to accumulate in the lower part of the structure where you sit and sleep. In contrast, tall open buildings lose heat rapidly through rising air. Here the ceiling is closer, the volume smaller. Efficiency becomes built into the very proportions of the room. Not everyone agrees on how permanent these pit houses were. Some experts interpret them as seasonal dwellings used primarily in colder months, while others argue they served as year-round homes supplemented by additional structures. The distribution of artifacts, the depth of floorware, and the presence of repairs all factor into this ongoing discussion. Outside, the fields lie dormant. You can picture them in summer alive with crops, but now they are silent. The pit house, half embraced by the ground, stands as a quiet counterpoint to the exposed landscape. It is neither cave nor towering house. It is something in between, shaped deliberately by human hands. You brush a bit of loose soil from the wall and notice how compact it has become over time. Repeated heating and cooling cycles bake the interior surface slightly, giving it more resilience. You might not articulate the chemistry behind it, but you feel the difference in texture. At night, when the temperature drops sharply, you are grateful for every inch of earth surrounding you. The wind can lash the roof, frost can whiten the fields, but below ground level the air shifts gradually, not violently. That gradual change is the difference between discomfort and danger. There are small trade-offs, light is limited, the entrance must be navigated carefully in snow, and dampness can creep in if drainage is poor. Yet compared to sleeping entirely exposed or in flimsy huts, this design offers a significant advantage. You lie back on a woven mat and watch firelight flicker across timber beams, shadows ripple along the curved roof. Outside, winter keeps its watch. Inside, the earth holds steady. The decision to dig was no longer a desperate improvisation. It was a strategy refined by observation passed quietly from one generation to the next. Each winter confirmed the lesson again. When the air turns cruel, step down, let the soil share its stored calm. And so you rest in this shallow cradle of earth, listening to the muted world beyond your walls, aware that the ground beneath your crops in summer now guards you through the cold. The wind changes again, and you find yourself on a small cluster of islands far to the north. The sea surrounds you in every direction, restless and steel grey. Salt hangs faintly in the air. The land is treeless, exposed and beautiful in a way that feels almost defiant. Winter here does not creep in quietly. It sweeps across the Atlantic and strikes with full force. You stand on the edge of a settlement that looks as though it has grown from the earth itself. Low stone walls curve gently across the ground, barely rising above the surrounding turf. From a distance, the homes are nearly invisible, swallowed by grass and soil. But as you step closer, you see doorways framed in stone slabs leading down into interior spaces that sit partially below the surface. This is Skara Brae, a Neolithic village in Orkney, dating back more than 5,000 years. Its preservation is remarkable, largely because it was buried under sand for centuries before being revealed by a storm in the 19th century. Archaeologists have mapped its stone houses, each connected by covered passageways, each sunken into midden and soil that provided natural insulation. These details are not legend. They are carved into stone floors and measured in excavation reports. You duck through a low entrance passage, feeling the shift as you move from wind to stillness. Immediately the air changes. The howl of the Atlantic reduces to a distant murmur. The walls around you are built from flat stones carefully stacked without mortar. Their thickness alone slows the movement of heat. Beyond the stone layers of accumulated waste and earth press and creating a buffer against cold. Inside the space feels compact but deliberate. Stone furniture lines the walls, beds carved from rock. A central hearth sits slightly recessed, blackened by centuries of fire. Even the doorway is designed thoughtfully angled and narrow, limiting the direct intrusion of wind. You run your fingers along the stone bed frame. It is cool to the touch, yet the interior air is far milder than outside. The partially subterranean design stabilizes the temperature. Even in fierce winter storms, these houses would have retained warmth more effectively than simple surface huts. One intriguing detail that often captures the imagination is the network of covered passages connecting the houses. You can move between homes without stepping fully into the elements. Some researchers interpret this as a practical response to harsh weather. Others wonder whether it also reflects a tightly knit social structure, where privacy was secondary to communal life. The interpretation is not settled, and new perspectives continue to emerge as the site is studied. You imagine a winter night here. Outside, waves crash against rocky shores. Snow skims low across the ground. Inside, several families gather around hearths that glow steadily. Smoke drifts upward and out through roof openings. The stone walls absorb heat slowly and release it gradually, softening the extremes of temperature. There is a faint smell of peat smoke lingering in the air. Although wood is scarce in Orkney, peat cut from the land can burn steadily. The scent is earthy and slightly sweet. It clings to clothing and hair. Combined with the mineral smell of stone, it creates a sensory world that feels grounded and steady. You sit near the hearth and feel warmth radiate outward. The floor beneath you is slightly lower than the outside ground level. That small difference shields you from lateral gusts. It also gives the house a sense of being cradled by the land rather than perched upon it. Some have proposed more imaginative theories about Skara Brae, including the idea that it was abandoned suddenly due to catastrophic climate events. While dramatic stories capture attention, the evidence suggests a more gradual process of desertion. Coastal erosion and shifting sands likely played significant roles. Yet the fact remains that these people built homes capable of withstanding centuries of wind and cold before nature reclaimed them. You glance toward the entrance passage and notice how narrow it is. To enter, you must bend slightly. This design reduces heat loss. It also creates a threshold moment, a transition from the exposed world to the sheltered interior. That psychological symmetry shift matters as much as the physical ones. The walls curve gently inward at certain points, shaping airflow and perhaps reinforcing structural stability. Stone slabs are set upright and locked together with careful precision. No mortar holds them, yet they endure. It is craftsmanship born not of luxury but of necessity. During long winters, light would have been limited. The hearth becomes both warmth and illumination. Shadows flicker across stone surfaces. Conversation fills the compact space. You can almost hear the low murmur of voices carried through the connecting passages neighbours only steps away. There is also evidence of sophisticated drainage systems beneath some of the houses. Channels carved into the floor suggest an awareness of moisture management. Living partially below ground brings the risk of dampness. Addressing that risk requires observation and adaptation. As you settle into this stone embrace, you sense the deliberate balance at work. The houses are not buried deeply like caves, yet they are not fully exposed either. They sit halfway between sky and soil, taking advantage of both light and insulation. Outside, winter presses against the island with relentless persistence. Inside, the temperature shifts slowly, moderated by earth and stone. You can imagine waking in the early hours hearing the wind, but not feeling its bite directly. The difference between discomfort and danger lies in these carefully placed stones. Skara Brae reminds you that underground architecture is not always dramatic or hidden in vast caverns. Sometimes it is subtle, integrated into the landscape so seamlessly that centuries can pass before it is noticed again. You lean back against the wall and let your eyes adjust to the dim glow of firelight. The sea may rage, frost may claim the fields, but within this partially sunken home the earth shares its quiet steadiness. The lesson continues to unfold. When winter tests you, you do not always build upward in defiance. Sometimes you sink slightly downward and in doing so find resilience. The sea fades behind you, replaced by an immense sweep of grassland that stretches farther than your eyes can comfortably measure. This is the Eurasian steppe in winter. The sky feels enormous, a pale dome pressing down on a landscape glazed with frost. The wind has no trees to tangle with, no cliffs to slow it. It travels uninterrupted, cutting across the plains with a sharp, persistent edge. You walk beside a small herd of livestock, their breath steaming in the cold air. Survival here is not only about protecting yourself. It is about sheltering animals that provide milk, meat, hides, and transport. When winter tightens its grip, both human and herd must endure together. At first glance, the steppe seems like the last place for underground architecture. The soil can freeze hard as stone. Snow can drift high in open fields. Yet you notice shallow depressions scattered across the landscape, often near riverbanks or in slightly sheltered hollows. These are winter dugouts, temporary semi-subterranean refuges carved into the earth by pastoral communities. Historical and archaeological evidence from various nomadic cultures across Central Asia indicates the use of Zemlyanki-style shelters, shallow pit houses reinforced with timber and covered with sod. Though many Stepsa peoples are associated with portable yurts, there is clear documentation that some groups constructed more earth-sheltered dwellings during especially severe winters. Portable felt tents are efficient in many seasons, but when temperatures plunge dramatically, digging down offers an extra layer of protection. You kneel beside one such dugout. The entrance is low and partially concealed by piled snow. Inside the space is modest but intentional. Timber beams support a roof layered with sod and earth. The interior floor sits below ground level, reducing exposure to lateral wind. When you step inside, the difference is immediate. The air feels calmer, more contained. The smell here is distinct. Earth mixed with the faint musk of animals. Smoke from a small hearth drifts upward and out through a vent. The walls packed with soil hold steady against the cold outside. You can hear the wind sweeping across the plains, but it is muted, softened by layers of ground above and around you. One detail that often surprises modern observers is how flexible steppe architecture could be. Nomadic life did not exclude the strategic use of fixed structures. In fact, historical sources from medieval travellers describe winter camps where semi-dug-in shelters complemented more mobile dwellings. This adaptability reflects a pragmatic approach rather than a rigid architectural identity. There is an ongoing discussion among researchers about how widespread these earth-sheltered winter refuges truly were among nomadic populations. Some argue they were relatively rare and used only in extreme conditions, while others believe they played a more consistent role in seasonal cycles. The archaeological record is uneven, partly because shallow dugouts leave subtle traces that are easily eroded by time. You sit near the hearth and extend your hands toward the warmth. The fire is small but effective because the shelter is compact and partially insulated by earth. It requires less fuel to maintain a livable temperature. On the open steppe, fuel can be scarce. Dried dung often serves as a primary source of heat. It burns steadily, producing a particular earthy scent that clings to clothing. Outside, the herd is clustered together, their bodies forming a living wall against the wind. Some dugouts are positioned near natural features such as low ridges or riverbanks to add further shelter. The choice of location is as important as the construction itself. You brush your fingers along the interior wall. It feels solid, slightly cool, but not freezing. The earth acts as a thermal buffer, inducing rapid temperature swings between day and night. Even if the outside air drops sharply after sunset, the interior cools gradually. That gradual change allows your body to adjust rather than shock. There is also a psychological effect in lowering yourself below the vast horizon. The steppe can feel overwhelming in its openness. Descending into a dugout compresses the world into a manageable scale. The ceiling is within reach. The walls are close. The immensity outside becomes a distant presence rather than an immediate threat. Some fringe interpretations have suggested that certain winter shelters on the steppe were aligned in particular ways for ritual or symbolic reasons. While alignment studies are intriguing, practical considerations such as prevailing winds and drainage likely dominated decisions. Still, it is possible that survival and symbolism intertwined in subtle ways. You imagine a winter night here. Snow drifts against the roof, adding insulation. Inside, the fire casts a warm glow on timber beams darkened by smoke. The air carries a mixture of earth fuel and animal presence. You hear the faint shifting of livestock outside their hooves pressing into frozen ground. The dugout does not eliminate hardship. Cold seeps in slowly. Moisture can accumulate if ventilation is poor, but compared to sleeping entirely exposed in a tent battered by wind, this design offers a crucial margin of safety. Historical accounts from later centuries describe how soldiers and peasants in Eastern Europe used similar earth shelters during campaigns and harsh winters. The principle remains consistent across time. When the air above becomes hostile, the soil below offers moderation. You lean back against the packed wall and close your eyes for a moment. The wind outside continues its endless sweep, but it no longer feels personal. It has been softened by layers of earth and intention. On the steppe, where movement defines much of life, there is still room for stillness. There is still space for descending slightly into the ground and borrowing its steadiness. The pattern repeats again. Across caves, pit houses, stone villages, and now grassy plains, the lesson remains clear. Winter tests resilience. The answer more often than not lies beneath your feet. You settle deeper into the dugout as the light fades from the horizon. The vast sky darkens overhead, but down here, wrapped in soil and smoke, you endure another night on the open steppe. The grasslands dissolve into paved roads and distant columns of oak rising from tiled rooftops. You step forward in time and space, arriving in a Roman town as winter settles across the empire. The streets are quieter now. Market stalls are shuttered early. Breath fogs in the air as citizens wrap themselves in woolen cloaks. At first glance, Rome does not seem like a civilization that would burrow into the earth for warmth. Its architecture reaches upward in arches and aqueducts, proclaiming confidence and order. Yet beneath the surface there is another story. Many Roman homes, especially in colder provinces, included cellars and partially sunken rooms that offered stable temperatures during both winter and summer. Archaeological excavations across Roman Britain and parts of Gaul have uncovered substructures beneath villas and townhouses, spaces used for the storage and occasionally for refuge in harsh weather. These underground rooms maintained a more consistent temperature than upper floors. This is firmly supported by building remains and written descriptions from the period. You descend a narrow stone staircase into one such cellar. The air shifts immediately. Outside, the wind scrapes along tiled roofs and rattles shutters. Down here, the air feels cooler but steady, untouched by sudden gusts. The walls are thick, built of stone and mortar pressing against surrounding soil. You run your hand across the surface. It is slightly damp in places, yet far less exposed than the rooms above. Amphorae line the walls filled with grain oil or wine. In winter, these provisions are not only supplies but reassurance. The underground space keeps them from freezing solid or spoiling due to fluctuating temperatures. Now you move into a more elaborate structure, one equipped with a hypocaust system. The hypocaust was a Roman innovation in which hot air from a furnace circulated beneath raised floors and sometimes within hollow walls. While most commonly associated with bathhouses, hypocausts were also installed in wealthier homes in colder regions. The concept is clear from surviving ruins where pillars of stacked tiles once supported floors above channels for heated air. You kneel and peer into the cavity beneath the floor. Even without a blazing fire at this moment, you can imagine the warmth rising gently upward, turning cold stone into a radiant surface. It is an elegant response to winter combining above-ground architecture with subterranean engineering. There is an amusing detail preserved in some Roman writings. Complaints about uneven heating appear in letters and accounts suggesting that rooms farthest from the furnace were often less comfortable. Comfort, it seems, has always been relative. Even in an advanced empire, someone likely grumbled about chilly corners. The cellar and hypocaust together demonstrate a layered understanding of climate control. Rather than relying solely on open hearths, Romans manipulated space below ground to regulate temperature. The soil around a cellar provided insulation. The channels beneath a hypocaust floor distributed warmth efficiently. Not every Roman citizen enjoyed such amenities. In crowded urban insulae or apartment blocks, lower levels sometimes offered slightly more stable temperatures than upper floors exposed to wind. However, these buildings could also be damp and poorly ventilated. The experience varied widely depending on wealth and location. There is still discussion among specialists about how extensively hypocaust systems were used in private homes compared to public baths. Some argue they were relatively rare luxuries outside elite residences, while others point to regional variations suggesting broader adoption in colder provinces. The evidence continues to be analysed room by room. You stand in the cellar and listen. Above you, faint footsteps echo across stone floors. The world continues at street level. Down here, the air feels muted, insulated from sudden change. The soil beyond the walls acts as a steady buffer resisting rapid shifts in temperature. In winter, this stability could mean the difference between frozen stores and preserved food, between biting drafts and manageable chill. The Romans might not have framed it in modern scientific language, but they clearly recognized the benefits of building partly below ground. There is also a symbolic element to descending into these spaces. Roman culture often associated the underworld with mystery and reverence. Yet in daily life, going below ground was practical rather than ominous. It was where you stored supplies, protected valuables, and sometimes found a more even climate. You move back upstairs and feel the contrast. The upper room is brighter but colder. Wind slips through shutters despite careful construction. Down below, thick walls and earth embrace the structure. As evening approaches, a small fire is lit in the furnace feeding the hypocaust. Gradually, warmth spreads beneath your feet. The stone floor loses its chill. The room above becomes comfortable without excessive smoke or open flames dominating the space. This blending of underground insulation and engineered airflow marks a significant moment in architectural history. It reflects a shift from simply digging for shelter to deliberately designing systems that harness the properties of earth and air. The Roman approach does not fully retreat into the ground as some earlier dwellings did. Instead, it integrates subterranean elements into a larger architectural vision. The earth becomes partner to stone, not a replacement for it. You rest your hand against a warmed wall and feel the subtle hum of heat travelling through hidden channels. Outside, winter still presses against tiled roofs and cobbled streets. Inside, beneath layers of masonry and soil, you experience a controlled, moderated environment. The pattern continues. Across cultures and centuries, people look downward for stability when the air above turns hostile. In Rome, that instinct evolves into structured engineering, blending practicality with ambition. You stand quietly in the warmed room, aware that beneath your feet lies a network of heated air and steady earth working together to soften the season. The stone floors of Rome fade from beneath your feet, replaced by pale volcanic rock that glows softly under a winter sun. You're in central Anatolia now, where the land rises in strange sculpted formations, shaped by ancient eruptions and patient erosion. The air is cold and dry. Snow settles lightly on the ridges, tracing every curve in white. At first, the landscape appears almost whimsical, dotted with tall cone-shaped outcrops, often called fairy chimneys. But as you draw closer, you notice dark openings carved into the rock. Doors, windows, entire facades hollowed from stone, and then you realize something even more astonishing. Beneath this rugged terrain lies not just a few rooms, but entire cities hidden underground. You step toward one of the entrances at Derinkuyu, one of the most famous subterranean complexes in Cappadocia. The descent begins with a narrow passage that slopes downward into cool darkness. The temperature shifts gradually, losing the bite of the open air. Within a few meters, the world above feels distant. Archaeological and historical research confirms that these underground cities were expanded significantly during the Byzantine period, though some portions may date back earlier to Hittite or Phrygian times. They were capable of sheltering thousands of people and their livestock during periods of invasion and harsh weather. The carved chambers, ventilation shafts, and storage rooms are still visible today. You continue downward, passing through corridors that twist gently, designed to slow intruders and perhaps to reduce drafts. The walls are smooth to the touch, shaped by human hands, but formed from relatively soft volcanic tuff. This stone is easy to carve, yet stable once exposed to air. The air inside is remarkably consistent. Even as winter grips the plateau above the underground chambers, maintain a steady, cool temperature that feels almost mild by comparison. You pause and notice the silence. Sound does not carry far here. Footsteps echo softly, then fade. Large circular stone doors rest near certain passageways. They can be rolled into place to seal off sections of the city. Their presence suggests that defense was a primary concern. Yet while protection from conflict is often emphasized, the thermal stability of these underground spaces would have been equally valuable during bitter winters. Some specialists suggest that the use of these cities may have been seasonal, while others propose more continuous occupation during unstable periods. The distribution of cooking areas, wine presses, and communal rooms points to extended stays. Exactly how often families retreated below ground remains a subject of ongoing research. You enter a broad chamber that once served as a communal space. The ceiling arches overhead carved directly from rock. Small alcoves line the walls, perhaps used for sleeping or storage. Even without a fire, the air feels steady, neither freezing nor oppressive. There is a fascinating detail that often surprises visitors. The ventilation shafts in these cities are not simple holes, but carefully engineered vertical channels that reach deep into the complex. Some double as wells, providing access to water while also circulating air. The design reflects a sophisticated understanding of airflow even without modern instruments. You run your fingers along the wall and feel its faint texture. The rock holds the temperature of the earth, resisting sudden shifts. Outside wind can sweep across the plateau with relentless force. Down here it barely whispers. Historians have long discussed whether the primary motivation for carving these cities was defense against invading forces or adaptation to climate extremes. Many agree that both factors likely played roles, but the relative importance of each is still examined through new excavations and analysis. You imagine descending here as snow begins to fall above. Families bring supplies, animals are guided carefully into designated chambers, doors are sealed. The world narrows to corridors and rooms lit by oil lamps. Smoke from hearths rises gently toward ventilation shafts escaping without filling the space. The smell is faintly mineral, mixed with the subtle scent of cooking and stored grain. The walls absorb echoes, creating a quiet that feels almost sacred. Even in a crowd, the underground environment imposes calm. There are chapels carved into some of these complexes, complete with simple altars and crosses etched into stone. Life below ground was not merely about survival. It included worship, conversation, and daily routines. The city beneath the city became a parallel world. Some imaginative theories have suggested that vast undiscovered tunnels connect multiple underground cities across the region. While it is true that some networks extend for kilometers, the idea of a single continuous subterranean metropolis remains speculative. Archaeologists continue to map and document what is verifiable, careful not to let fantasy overshadow evidence. You sit on a carved stone bench and notice how your body relaxes in the stable air. There is no sudden gust to make you flinch, no biting draft at your ankles. The earth around you functions as an immense insulating blanket. In winter, this stability could preserve food stores and protect vulnerable members of the community. Children and elders would feel the difference between exposure on the plateau and shelter in these chambers. The decision to descend would not have been taken lightly, but once below, the sense of security would have been tangible. As you ascend slightly toward the entrance, you feel the temperature change again slowly. At first, then more sharply. The boundary between underground and open air is unmistakable. You glance back into the dim corridors and appreciate the ingenuity required to carve such spaces by hand. Cappadocia demonstrates how far underground architecture can evolve. No longer just pits or cellars, these are multi-level complexes with storage, worship, and defense woven together. The earth is not merely a shield, but a habitat. Outside, winter continues to drift across the plateau. Inside, beneath layers of volcanic stone, life endures in measured calm. You take one last look down the corridor where lamplight flickers softly against rock walls, and understand once more that when the surface world grows hostile, humanity has often found resilience in the quiet embrace of the ground. The carved rock of Cappadocia fades into a different landscape, one shaped not by volcanic cones, but by towering cliffs of fine, yellow earth. You arrive on the lowest plateau of northern China, where winter sweeps across open fields and settles into river valleys. The wind here carries dust in warmer seasons, but now it carries cold. The sky feels wide and pale, the ground firm beneath your boots. You look up at a sheer wall of loess, a compacted silt deposited over thousands of years. At first, it seems unremarkable, just a natural cliff face rising above the land. Then you notice dark rectangular openings cut directly into the vertical surface. Doorways, windows, entire homes carved horizontally into the earth. These are Yaodong cave dwellings that have been used for centuries and in some areas are still inhabited today. Historical records and archaeological findings show that such structures became especially common in northern China during periods of dense rural settlement valued for their thermal efficiency and low construction cost. This is well established through surveys of traditional architecture across Shanxi and neighbouring provinces. You approach one entrance and step inside. The transition is immediate. Outside, the winter air slices against your cheeks. Inside, the temperature feels steady, almost surprisingly mild. The thick, loose walls surround you on all sides, forming a natural insulating barrier. The interior is arched, gracefully following the curve carved into the cliff. The ceiling rises gently overhead. Light filters in through the doorway, illuminating a space that feels both grounded and expansive. The walls are smooth, sometimes coated with a thin layer of plaster. Decorations may hang here, simple calligraphy or paper cuttings, adding warmth to the earthy tones. You press your palm against the wall. It is cool but not cold. The mass of earth beyond it buffers the interior from rapid temperature swings. In winter, heat from a stove or heated bed platform accumulates within the thick walls and releases gradually. In summer, the same mass helps keep the space cooler than the outside air. One notable feature in many Yaodong homes is the Kang, a raised brick platform that serves as both bed and heated surface. A flue system channels smoke from a cooking stove beneath the platform before it exits through a chimney. The residual heat warms the bed from below, creating a comfortable place to rest during frigid nights. This system is documented in traditional building manuals and observed in countless surviving homes. You sit on the edge of a kang and imagine the gentle warmth rising through bricks after a meal has been cooked. The scent of wood smoke lingers lightly in the air. It mingles with the faint mineral smell of packed earth and the aroma of stored grain. There is an intriguing detail often mentioned by travellers in earlier centuries. Some described entire villages carved into cliff faces, their entrances aligned in neat rows, giving the impression of an earthbound city. From a distance, these settlements appear almost invisible, blending seamlessly with the landscape. The camouflage is not necessarily intentional, but it is effective. Researchers continue to explore how the design of Yaodong evolved over time. Some propose that the earliest forms were simple dugouts expanded gradually, while others argue for more systematic planning from the outset. Regional variations add complexity to the discussion, with freestanding earth-sheltered homes also appearing in flatter terrain where cliffs were absent. You move deeper into the dwelling and notice the quiet. The thick walls absorb outside noise. Even when winter winds sweep across the plateau, their force is muted here. The interior feels cocooned, steady, resistant to sudden shifts. There are practical advantages beyond warmth. Construction requires less timber, which can be scarce in certain regions. The earth itself provides structural support. When carved correctly, loess can stand firm without additional reinforcement, though maintenance is essential to prevent erosion. You glance back toward the doorway where pale winter light frames the outside world. Frost may coat the fields. Breath may hang in the air, yet inside the temperature remains relatively stable, requiring less fuel to maintain comfort. Some have speculated about symbolic meanings in living within the earth, connecting Yaodong to traditional Chinese cosmology and the balance between heaven and earth. While cultural interpretations certainly exist, the primary driver appears to be practicality. The thermal benefits are clear and measurable. Still, the blending of shelter and landscape carries a poetic resonance. You imagine a winter evening here. Family members gather on the warmed kang, sharing food and stories. The stove glows softly, its heat travelling through hidden flues beneath the platform. Outside, wind brushes across the plateau. Inside, the earth holds its calm. There are also challenges. Heavy rains can erode cliff faces. Proper drainage is crucial. Overcrowding in some regions has led to structural stress. Yet the longevity of these dwellings demonstrates their resilience. Many have endured for generations, adapting to changing needs while preserving their core design. You lean back against the curved wall and feel a sense of equilibrium. The ground that grows crops in summer now shields you in winter. The same soil that dusts the horizon in dry months becomes your insulation when frost descends. In this landscape, underground architecture does not hide in remote corners. It defines entire communities. It shapes daily life, social interaction, and seasonal rhythms. As evening approaches, the light at the doorway softens. Shadows stretch gently across the arched ceiling. You sense once again that when winter presses against the surface world, the answer often lies in stepping slightly inward, letting the earth temper the extremes. You close your eyes for a moment on the warmed platform, aware that beyond the Lues wall, the plateau rests under a pale sky, and within these carved chambers life continues in steady quiet. The Lues cliffs soften into forested hills and tiled rooftops as you travel eastward across winter landscapes. Snow gathers lightly along eaves and thin plumes of smoke rise into a pale sky. You are now on the Korean peninsula, where cold continental air can sweep down from the north with startling intensity. Rivers glaze over, fields stiffen under frost. The chill has a way of creeping into bones if you let it. You step inside a traditional hanok, its wooden frame resting on stone foundations. At first glance, it appears entirely above ground, with gently curving rooflines and papered doors. But beneath your feet lies one of the most ingenious winter adaptations in architectural history. The ondol system channels heat under the floor through a network of flues connected to a kitchen stove. When a fire is lit for cooking, hot smoke travels horizontally beneath stone slabs before exiting through a chimney. The floor above gradually warms, radiating heat upward into the room. Archaeological evidence indicates that early forms of ondol date back at least to the Three Kingdoms period more than 1,000 years ago, and the system became widespread in later centuries. You kneel and touch the floor. It is warm, not scorching, but gently comforting. Unlike a fireplace that concentrates heat in one corner, ondol distributes warmth evenly across the entire surface. The room feels calm, balanced. The air remains relatively clear because smoke is directed through channels rather than lingering indoors. There is something deeply soothing about heat rising from below. Your body relaxes instinctively when warmth supports you from the ground up. In winter, when cold air tends to sink and pool near the floor, this upward radiation counters that effect elegantly. Some researchers have suggested that the widespread adoption of ondol shaped Korean domestic culture in subtle ways. Because floors were heated, people often sat, ate and slept directly on them rather than on elevated furniture. The architecture influenced posture, social interaction and daily rhythm. It is a reminder that heating technology does more than change temperature. It shapes behaviour. You stretch out briefly on a woven mat placed over the warm stone. The sensation is immediate. The chill that lingered in your hands from outside begins to fade. The warmth seeps into muscles, gradually encouraging stillness. An interesting historical note appears in records from the Joseon dynasty, where officials sometimes issued guidance about maintaining chimneys and flues to prevent smoke backflow. Proper construction and cleaning were essential for safety and efficiency. The system required care and knowledge passed down through generations of builders. There is also a small, delightful detail that travellers once remarked upon. In some homes, different rooms were connected to the same stove but designed with varying flue lengths. Rooms farther from the fire received cooler air, allowing families to choose warmer or cooler sleeping spaces depending on preference. It is a subtle example of thermal zoning long before modern thermostats. Debate continues among architectural historians about whether ondol evolved independently or was influenced by earlier hypocaust systems in neighbouring regions. While similarities exist, the Korean system developed its own distinct characteristics optimised for local materials and climate. The discussion remains lively in academic circles. You look toward the kitchen area where a modest fire burns. The smell of wood smoke lingers faintly, but the room itself remains clear. The heated floor holds warmth long after the flames subside thanks to the thermal mass of stone and clay beneath it. In this case, the architecture does not require deep excavation of living space. Instead, it integrates underground channels into an above-ground structure. The earth and masonry beneath the floor act as a hidden partner, storing and releasing heat steadily. You imagine a winter night when snow falls softly outside. The roof gathers a white blanket. Wind brushes the wooden walls. Inside, the floor radiates gentle warmth. Children curl up on mats. Elders sit comfortably without layers of heavy bedding. The contrast between exterior cold and interior calm feels almost magical. There are, of course, practical considerations. Poorly constructed flues can lead to smoke leakage. Excessive moisture beneath floors can weaken materials. Yet the enduring presence of Onol across centuries suggests that its benefits far outweighed its challenges. You press your palm flat against the floor again, appreciating how warmth emanates from below, rather than blasting from a single point. The effect is subtle but pervasive. Instead of chasing heat from a fireplace, you inhabit it evenly. This design illustrates another evolution in humanity's relationship with the ground. Rather than carving entire rooms into earth, builders learned to send warmth beneath floors, turning the soil itself into a reservoir. The underground becomes a conduit rather than a chamber. Outside, winter continues to grip the peninsula. Fields lie quiet. Frost traces patterns along window paper. But inside, supported by a network of hidden flues, you feel enveloped in steady heat. The lesson remains consistent across continents. When air turns harsh, look downward. Whether through pit houses, carved cities, or heated channels, the earth offers stability. You settle onto the warm surface as evening deepens. The fire in the kitchen dims, yet the floor retains its stored comfort. In this gentle upward glow, winter feels less threatening, more distant, as if held at bay by thoughtful design beneath your feet. The warmed stone beneath you fades into darker soil and timber posts as you drift farther east into a time and memory. The air carries the scent of cedar and damp earth. You are now in ancient Japan during a period when winters could be sharp and unforgiving, especially in inland regions. Snow falls quietly across forest clearings. The landscape is hushed, wrapped in pale stillness. Before grand castles and tiled temples rise across these islands, there are simpler homes known as Tatiana, pit dwellings partially sunk into the ground. Archaeological excavations from the Jomon and Yayoi periods reveal circular or rectangular depressions lined with wooden posts that supported thatched roofs. These dwellings were not accidental hollows. They were planned, measured, and repeated across settlements. You step down into one such dwelling. The floor sits below ground level, carved carefully into packed soil. Timber posts rise at intervals supporting a conical or sloping roof of reeds and grass. At the centre lies a hearth, its ash dark against the earthen floor. The temperature difference is subtle but noticeable. Outside wind glides across open ground, slipping between trees and over rooftops. Inside, the lowered floor shields you from that horizontal rush. The earth walls, reinforced with clay, dampen the sting of winter air. Excavation reports from sites such as Toro in Shizuoka Prefecture confirm that these pit dwellings were standard features of early agrarian communities. Storage pits for grain and tools are often found nearby, indicating year-round occupation rather than purely seasonal use. You crouch near the hearth and imagine a small fire crackling steadily. Smoke drifts upwards toward a vent in the roof, though ventilation in these structures was not always perfect. The scent of burning wood mingles with damp soil. It is an intimate aroma, grounding and warm. There is a small but charming detail noted by some archaeologists. In certain excavated dwellings, the floors show evidence of repeated resurfacing with fresh clay layers. It suggests that inhabitants maintained and refreshed their living spaces, carefully smoothing over wear from daily life. Even in modest pit homes, there was attention to comfort and order. You press your hand against the interior wall. It feels firm, slightly cool, yet not biting. The soil around you acts as insulation, reducing rapid temperature fluctuations between day and night. In winter, this buffering effect would have been invaluable, especially in regions where snowfall could accumulate deeply. Discussion continues among researchers about how these dwellings balance practical needs with ritual significance. Some pit houses include features that appear ceremonial, such as specific post placements or unusual artifact deposits beneath floors. Whether these elements reflect spiritual beliefs tied to the earth or simply structural variations remains open to interpretation. You sit cross-legged near the hearth and listen. The world outside is muted by layers of soil and thatch. Snow lands softly on the roof, adding another insulating layer. The low ceiling traps warmth close to the living area, preventing it from escaping upward too quickly. In many of these early Japanese communities, life revolved around agriculture and seasonal rhythms. The pit dwelling supported that rhythm by offering a stable refuge during colder months. Grain harvested in autumn could be stored nearby, protected from frost by the earth's steady temperature. You imagine a winter evening. Family members gather around the central fire. Tools are repaired, stories are told. The glow of embers flickers across timber beams darkened by smoke. The small scale of the dwelling encourages closeness. The lowered floor creates a sense of enclosure, a protective bowl carved into the land. Some scholars propose that the design of these homes influenced later architectural traditions in Japan, including the emphasis on flexible interior space and close relationship to natural materials. While later houses rose fully above ground, the sensitivity to airflow and thermal comfort may trace roots back to these early forms. There are limitations, of course. Pit dwellings can be prone to dampness if drainage is poor. Heavy rains may threaten structural integrity. Careful site selection becomes essential. Communities often chose slightly elevated ground to avoid flooding while still benefiting from earth insulation. You shift closer to the fire and feel warmth spread slowly through your limbs. The pit design allows heat to accumulate where you sit and sleep. Outside, frost thickens along tree branches. Inside, the temperature changes gradually, not abruptly. In this setting, underground architecture is modest yet effective. It does not involve vast carved cities or complex heating channels. It is simply a thoughtful lowering of space into soil combined with timber and thatch, creating a buffer against winter's bite. You glance toward the entrance where pale light filters in. The doorway is small, requiring you to bend slightly. This reduces heat loss and creates a threshold between exterior cold and interior calm. The pattern persists across continents. When temperatures fall, people draw closer to the ground, seeking steadiness in its mass. In ancient Japan, that instinct takes the form of the tatiana, a dwelling that blends earth, wood, and fire into a quiet refuge. As night settles over the clearing, you lie back on a woven mat near the hearth. Snow continues to gather outside. The roof holds firm. The earth around you remains constant. Within this shallow cradle carved into the land, winter feels less overwhelming. The ground that nurtures crops in warmer seasons now guards you through the cold. The forest clearing recedes, replaced by a rugged northern coastline where mountains meet dark water. You feel the air change immediately. It carries salt pine and the unmistakable sharpness of Scandinavian winter. Snow lies thick across the landscape and the sky hangs low heavy with grey light. You approach a structure that at first seems almost part of the earth itself. Its walls are thick layered with turf cut from the surrounding ground. The roof is heavy with sod and grass now dusted with snow. Only a wooden doorway and a small opening for smoke reveal that this mound is a home. This is a Viking turf house common across Norway, Iceland, and parts of Greenland during the early medieval period. Excavations of longhouses at sites such as Borg in the Lofton Islands confirm that many Norse dwellings were built with timber frames insulated by thick layers of sod. The turf provided substantial protection against wind and cold, particularly in regions where winter storms could be fierce. You duck through the doorway, which is deliberately low. The transition from outside to inside is dramatic. The wind that roared across the fjord now feels distant. Inside, the air is dim and warm, scented with wood smoke and damp grass. The walls are not smooth stone or carved earth. They are layered blocks of turf stacked carefully to create thickness and mass. Beyond them lies more soil, more insulation. The roof beams arch overhead, supporting the heavy sod above. Snow resting on top only adds to the insulating effect. A central hearth runs along the length of the longhouse, its fire casting flickering light across wooden benches and carved pillars. Smoke drifts upward toward a vent in the roof, sometimes lingering in the upper reaches before escaping. The smell is strong but familiar part of daily life. One fascinating detail uncovered by archaeologists is that some turf houses included small side rooms or partially sunken storage areas dug into the ground beneath or beside the main structure. These spaces helped preserve food during winter months, maintaining a steady temperature even when the outside world froze solid. You press your hand against the interior wall. It feels firm yet slightly springy, the turf holding moisture but also warmth. The thickness of these walls can reach a metre or more, creating a barrier against the relentless cold outside. There has been discussion among historians about how much these houses relied on the insulation of turf versus the communal heat generated by many occupants and livestock sharing space. Some longhouses sheltered both people and animals under the same roof, their combined body heat contributing significantly to interior warmth. The balance between structural insulation and shared warmth continues to be examined through experimental archaeology and reconstruction projects. You sit on a wooden bench near the hearth. The fire crackles steadily, fueled by scarce timber or driftwood collected along the shore. Outside, wind sweeps across the fjord, rattling loose snow against the walls. Inside, the thick sod muffles the sound to a low murmur. There is a subtle beauty in the way these houses merge with the landscape. In summer, grass grows across their roofs, blending them into the hills. In winter, snow settles into the turf, forming a continuous blanket. The home becomes almost invisible against the terrain. Some earlier accounts from medieval Iceland describe how travellers sometimes struggled to distinguish houses from natural mounds when approaching settlements during snowstorms. It is a small but vivid reminder of how seamlessly architecture and earth intertwined. You stretch your legs toward the fire and feel warmth radiate outward. The low ceiling traps heat close to where you sit and sleep. The combination of turf insulation and interior fire creates a stable microclimate compared to the biting air outside. Life here demands resilience. Winters are long and dark, storms can isolate communities for days. The turf house becomes more than shelter. It is a centre of social life, storytelling, craft and survival. You glance toward a partially sunken storage pit near the rear of the structure. Barrels and dried fish rest in the cool, steady air. Even when temperatures fluctuate, outside the earth beneath the floor maintains relative consistency. Researchers continue to analyse how these buildings evolved over time, noting regional variations in wall thickness, roof pitch and interior layout. While the general principle of turf insulation remains clear, the details reflect adaptation to local conditions and available materials. You lean back against the wall and feel the quiet strength of sod and soil surrounding you. The ground that supports grazing animals in summer now forms the shield that guards you in winter. Outside the fjord lies under a grey ski, ice forms along the shoreline. Inside the hearth glows and the turf walls hold steady. Across cultures, the instinct repeats itself in different materials and forms. When winter tightens its hold, people turn toward the earth, drawing its mass and stability into their homes. You close your eyes, briefly listening to the faint hiss of wind against sod and the steady crackle of fire. Within this earthen embrace, winter feels manageable, contained within walls that rise not in defiance of nature but in partnership with it. The longhouse fades into a landscape that feels both harsher and more alive. You're in Iceland now, where winter does not simply arrive, it settles in with quiet authority. The ground beneath your boots is a mixture of volcanic rock and frozen turf. Steam rises faintly from distant patches of earth, curling into the cold air like whispered secrets. Here fire and ice coexist. You approach a cluster of low buildings that seem almost swallowed by the land. Like their Scandinavian cousins, Icelandic homes of the medieval period were often constructed with timber frames and thick turf walls. Yet in this volcanic environment there was another ally beneath the surface: geothermal heat. Excavations and historical descriptions confirm that early Icelandic settlers adapted turf construction extensively due to the scarcity of large timber. Imported wood was precious. Turf cut in heavy blocks and layered over frames provided insulation against the brutal North Atlantic winters. The remains of such structures have been uncovered across the island, their outlines still visible in the earth. You step inside one of these reconstructed homes. The air feels calmer, immediately insulated by thick sod walls. The roof is layered with turf that in summer would bloom with grass. In winter it is capped with snow, adding yet another insulating layer. A central hearth burns sturdily, its glow reflecting off wooden beams darkened by smoke. The scent is rich and earthy, a blend of peat wood and damp soil. You settle onto a bench along the wall and feel the warmth gather slowly around you. In some regions of Ireland, settlers built near geothermal hot springs. Not every home tapped directly into underground heat. There are documented cases where natural warm water was used for bathing or washing, even in cold months. The idea that warmth could rise from the earth itself must have felt almost miraculous in such a stark climate. There is a charming historical note preserved in Icelandic sagas, describing how families sometimes dried clothes and fish inside these turf houses using the steady interior warmth to preserve supplies. The image of cod hanging from beams while snow piles outside captures the blend of practicality and endurance that defined life here. Architectural historians continue to examine how much geothermal resources influenced settlement patterns in early Iceland. While fertile land and access to fishing were primary factors, proximity to warm springs likely added an additional layer of appeal in certain areas. The relative weight of these factors remains part of ongoing analysis. You press your hand against the turf wall, it feels thick and reassuring. Beyond it, wind may be whipping across lava fields, but here the air changes gradually. The thermal mass of sod and soil slows the loss of heat. Even when the fire burns low, the interior does not immediately plunge into freezing temperatures. Some turf houses included partially sunken storage rooms dug into the ground beneath or beside the main living space. These cool but stable areas helped preserve food through long winters. Butter, dried meat, and grain could be stored with less risk of spoilage. There is also an intriguing detail about how these homes aged. Over time, turf walls would settle and compact, sometimes requiring periodic rebuilding or reinforcement. Families maintained their houses as living structures, patching and layering fresh sod when needed. The home was not static. It evolved with the land. You look toward a small window opening covered with oiled parchment or animal membrane. Light filters in, softly diffused and pale. Outside snow drifts across the landscape sculpted by wind. Inside the hearth provides a steady glow. Some have speculated that the blending of turf architecture with Iceland's dramatic landscape contributed to the strong storytelling tradition found in the sagas. Long winter nights spent in enclosed, insulated spaces may have encouraged oral history and narrative craft. While this idea cannot be measured directly, the cultural connection between environment and expression is compelling. You shift closer to the fire and feel warmth soak into your bones. The combination of turf insulation and communal heat creates a pocket of stability in an otherwise unforgiving environment. Geothermal energy would later become a defining feature of Icelandic life. But even in the medieval period, the understanding that warmth could come from below shaped how people thought about their surroundings. The earth was not merely cold rock. It held hidden heat. Outside, the sky darkens early. Winter nights stretch long across the island. The wind sweeps over open ground, but the turf house remains steady, anchored to soil and stone. You lean back against the wall and listen to the faint crackle of peat in the hearth. The sod above you carries the weight of snow without complaint. The ground beneath your feet holds a quiet reserve of warmth. Across centuries and continents, the lesson continues to unfold in new forms. Sometimes the answer to winter's severity lies not only in digging downward, but in recognizing the heat that already moves beneath the surface. In this volcanic land of contrasts, you rest within walls that are both earth and shelter, firelight flickering gently as the cold world waits outside. The volcanic steam fades, replaced by the damp chill of a medieval European town. Narrow streets wind between timber-framed houses. The air smells faintly of smoke-wet straw and distant livestock. Winter has settled in quietly but firmly. Frost clings to roof tiles and breath hangs in the air like pale mist. You approach a sturdy house with thick stone foundations. Its upper levels jut slightly over the street, supported by wooden beams. From the outside it appears like many others, modest and practical. But you know that beneath its ground floor lies another layer of architecture that becomes especially valuable when temperatures drop. You open a heavy wooden door and step inside. The main room is cool, warmed only by a small hearth. Then you notice a trap door set into the floor. You lift it carefully and descend a narrow staircase into the undercroft below. The air shifts as you move downward. The cellar is dim and steady, surrounded by thick stone walls pressed against the surrounding soil. Even in winter, the temperature here remains more consistent than in the rooms above. Medieval records and surviving buildings confirm that undercrofts and cellars were common features in European towns used primarily for storage, but sometimes serving as temporary refuge during severe weather. You run your hand along the stone wall. It is slightly damp but not frozen. Barrels of ale line one side, sacks of grain another. The underground space protects these supplies from both frost and spoilage. Without such insulation, food could freeze solid during particularly harsh winters. There is a small but vivid detail preserved in some medieval accounts. In times of extreme cold, families occasionally moved bedding into cellars to take advantage of the more stable temperature. While not designed as primary living quarters, these spaces could offer relief from biting drafts above. Scholars examining household inventories and architectural remains have explored how frequently undercrofts were used as winter shelters rather than solely as storage. The evidence suggests occasional use in severe conditions, though daily life typically remained upstairs. The extent of this practice varies by region and wealth. You pause in the quiet of the cellar and listen. The sounds of the street above are muffled by layers of stone and earth. The world feels distant, softened. The ground surrounding you acts as a buffer, slowing the intrusion of outside cold. In larger buildings, especially monasteries and guild halls, undercrofts were constructed with impressive vaulted ceilings. These stone chambers could span considerable space, their arches distributing weight efficiently. Excavations in cities such as York and Paris as this will reveal extensive subterranean networks beneath medieval structures. You imagine descending here during a bitter winter night. Wind rattles shutters above. Snow gathers in narrow lanes. Down below, the air remains cool but bearable. A small brazier might provide gentle warmth, its glow reflecting off curved stone. There has been ongoing discussion among historians about how climate fluctuations during the later medieval period influenced building practices. The onset of cooler temperatures associated with the early phases of the Little Ice Age may have increased reliance on insulated spaces, including cellars. While direct causation is complex, the correlation invites thoughtful examination. You brush dust from a wooden barrel and notice how the floor is slightly lower at one end, likely designed for drainage. Moisture management was essential in underground spaces. Builders understood that water could undermine even the strongest stone. The undercroft represents a quieter form of underground architecture. It is not dramatic like a carved city, nor intimate like a pit house. It is practical, integrated into a larger structure. Yet in moments of need, it can become a refuge. You climb halfway up the stairs and feel the difference in air. The upper room is colder, more exposed to drafts that slip through gaps in timber frames. Down below, thick masonry and earth create a steady envelope. Some towns developed extensive cellar systems beneath rows of houses, occasionally connecting adjacent buildings. Whether these connections were intentional from the outset or evolved over time remains debated among urban historians. Surviving passages hint at both planned construction and opportunistic expansion. You sit on a wooden crate and imagine a family gathered here during an especially harsh frost. Children huddle under blankets. Adults tend a small source of heat. The space is dim but stable. Supplies are within reach. The earth surrounding the cellar acts as a protective layer against the most severe temperature swings. Outside church bells echo faintly through the cold air. Inside the undercroft holds its quiet composure. The contrast between street-level chill and subterranean steadiness is unmistakable. In medieval Europe, survival during winter depended on many factors including fuel availability, clothing and food stores. Yet architecture played its part. Thick walls, low ceilings and underground rooms all contributed to endurance. You lean back against the stone and close your eyes briefly. The cellar smells of grain and wood, of earth and faint smoke. It is not luxurious, but it is dependable. Across continents and centuries, the pattern continues in varied forms. When cold presses hard against the surface world, people turn downward, drawing comfort from soil and stone. Here beneath the bustle of a medieval town, you find another expression of that enduring instinct. The undercroft may not be glamorous, but in winter's quiet severity it offers something essential: stability. The narrow lanes of the medieval town dissolve into sun-baked earth and pale desert light. At first you think you have left winter behind. The sky above North Africa is vast and blue, and the ground stretches in warm tones of ochre and sand. But as evening approaches, the temperature drops with surprising speed. Desert climates are deceptive. Days can be scorching, yet nights in winter bite with unexpected chill. You walk across a flat expanse toward what appears to be a shallow depression in the ground. There are no towering walls, no visible rooftops. Instead, the earth opens into a wide circular courtyard carved downward into the soil. Around its perimeter, doorways lead into rooms hollowed directly into the surrounding walls. You descend a sloped path into the courtyard and feel the air shift. The ground encloses you gently. The sky narrows to a bright circle overhead. This is a troglodyte dwelling in a form of subterranean architecture found in parts of Tunisia and other arid regions. Archaeological surveys and historical accounts confirm that families in areas such as Matmata carved homes into compacted earth, creating underground courtyards with surrounding rooms. These structures offered remarkable thermal stability, protecting inhabitants from both summer heat and winter cold. You step into one of the rooms opening off the courtyard. The interior is cool but not cold. Thick earthen walls surround you on all sides, their mass slowing the exchange of heat with the outside environment. Even as night air cools rapidly above the temperature, here changes gradually. You run your fingers across the curved wall. It feels smooth and solid, shaped by careful excavation. The absence of above-ground walls reduces exposure to wind. The courtyard design allows light and air to enter without sacrificing insulation. There is a practical elegance in this layout. During winter nights, the surrounding earth retains warmth accumulated during the day. During summer days, the same mass absorbs heat and keeps interior spaces relatively cool. It is a passive system requiring no fuel beyond occasional hearth fires. Some historians have explored whether these underground homes were primarily responses to climate or whether defense and privacy also influenced their design. The debate continues, with evidence suggesting that environmental adaptation was central, though social and security considerations likely played supporting roles. You sit on a woven mat in the courtyard and look upward. The sky has shifted to deep violet. Stars begin to appear. The air above cools quickly, yet down here the chill feels softened. The walls surrounding you act as a barrier against rapid temperature loss. An interesting anecdote from 20th century visitors describes how some troglodyte homes appeared almost invisible from a distance. Travellers could cross the landscape without realising entire families lived beneath their feet. The architecture blends seamlessly into its surroundings, revealing itself only when you stand at its edge. You move into a kitchen space carved from the earth. A small hearth glows softly, its smoke rising toward the open courtyard before dispersing into the night sky. The scent of burning wood mingles with dry soil. The design encourages communal life around the central open space. Rooms branch outward like petals from a flower, each partially insulated by the surrounding ground. When winter winds sweep across the desert plateau, they pass over the surface, leaving the sunken courtyard comparatively calm. Researchers continue to examine how ancient these structures truly are, as some may have roots stretching back centuries before written documentation. The precise timeline varies by region, adding layers of complexity to their study. You press your palm against the earth wall once more and feel its steady coolness. It does not fluctuate sharply with each gust of wind. It holds a kind of quiet memory of the day's warmth. Desert winter nights can feel startlingly cold under open sky. Yet within this sunken courtyard, the sensation is moderated. The earth buffers the extremes, creating a pocket of livable air. You imagine lying down in one of the carved rooms as night deepens, the ceiling arches overward smooth and protective. Outside the courtyard, frost might form on exposed ground. Here the temperature declines slowly, giving your body time to adjust. The troglodyte dwelling demonstrates another variation of underground architecture. Instead of carving horizontally into cliffs or building walls of sod, inhabitants sink entire living spaces vertically into the earth, forming sheltered bowls of stability. As the stars brighten overhead, you sense again that the earth can serve as a partner in resilience. Whether in cold northern fjords or arid deserts, the principle remains consistent. The mass of soil resists rapid change. You lean back against the curved wall and listen to the faint crackle of fire. Above, the sky stretches vast and clear. Around you the earth forms a quiet embrace. In this desert landscape, winter's bite is gentler but still present, and once again humanity answers by stepping downward, allowing the ground itself to soften the night. The desert courtyard recedes, replaced by the thin, mountain air that feels crisp and startlingly clear. You draw a breath and notice how it seems to reach deeper into your lungs, cool and sharp. The Andes rise around you in layered ridges, their peaks brushed with snow. Even when the sun shines brightly during the day, nights at this altitude can be bitter. You stand near a small settlement perched along a slope. The houses appear modest, built from stone and adobe, their walls thick and pale against the rugged terrain. Some sit directly against the hillside, partially embedded into the earth. Others are constructed with rear walls pressed into the slope, borrowing insulation from the mountain itself. Archaeological research across the Andean highlands confirms that pre-Columbian communities, including those associated with the Inca, and earlier cultures frequently used thick-walled stone or adobe structures designed to moderate extreme temperature swings. At high altitudes, daily variation can be dramatic, with warm afternoons giving way to freezing nights. Embedding portions of a dwelling into the earth helped reduce those fluctuations. You step inside one of these semi-buried homes. The doorway is low, requiring you to bow slightly. Inside, the air feels calmer than outside, where wind moves freely across open terraces. The thick walls absorb heat from the day and release it gradually after sunset. You run your hand along the interior surface. It is cool but steady. The floor sits slightly below the surrounding ground level, adding another layer of protection against wind. In the corner, a small hearth rests on a stone base. Smoke drifts toward an opening near the roof. There is a detail often mentioned in Andean studies that captures your imagination. Some highland communities place stones along the interior walls that had been warmed in the sun during the day. These stones continue to radiate gentle heat into the room at night. It is a simple yet effective strategy, blending architecture with daily routine. Scholars examining Andean domestic architecture continue to explore how much of this design was shaped by climate versus social organization. Some argue that the clustering of houses and shared walls played an equally important role in conserving warmth, while others emphasize the importance of partially embedding structures into slopes for insulation. You sit near the hearth and listen. Outside, the wind brushes across dry grasses. Inside, the stone walls dampen the sound. The room feels enclosed without being cramped. The mass of earth behind the rear wall acts as a thermal buffer, resisting rapid cooling. In certain regions, storage rooms were carved directly into the mountainside, used to preserve food such as potatoes and maize. These spaces maintained relatively stable temperatures, protecting supplies from frost damage. Such storage practices are well documented in archaeological surveys of Andean sites. You glance toward the doorway and see twilight settling over terraced fields. Snow may rest on distant peaks, yet within this semi-sheltered room the temperature declines gradually. The difference is subtle but significant. Suggests that communities adjusted building. Techniques during colder phases, thickening walls, or choosing more sheltered slopes. The relationship between environmental change and architectural adaptation remains an active area of study. You lean back against the wall and feel its solidity. The mountain itself supports you. The rear of the dwelling is not exposed to open air but backed by packed soil and rock. This reduces heat loss through that surface concentrating warmth within the living space. As darkness deepens, you imagine a family gathering around the hearth. The smell of burning dung or dried brush fills the room softly. Blankets woven from alpaca wool are wrapped tightly around shoulders. The heat from the day stored in stone and earth begins to release, gently extending comfort into the night. The Andean example reminds you that underground architecture does not always require dramatic excavation. Sometimes it is enough to lean into the slope to let the mountain share its steadiness. You step outside briefly and feel the sharp chill intensify. Frost begins to form on exposed surfaces. Returning inside, you notice the contrast once more. The interior is not warm in the sense of summer, but it is buffered, moderated. Some early colonial observers wrote about highland dwellings with a mixture of admiration and misunderstanding, noting their thickness and earth integration without fully grasping their thermal logic. Modern analysis has clarified what those communities understood intuitively. Mass and insulation matter. You settle near the hearth and watch embers glow. The room holds its warmth gently. The slope behind you stands silent and firm. Across landscapes as varied as volcanic islands and desert plains, the pattern persists. When winter threatens, humanity turns to soil and stone for steadiness. Here in the Andes, high above sea level, you rest in a home that draws strength from the mountain itself. Outside, the cold sharpens under starlight. Inside, the earth shares its quiet resilience, allowing you to endure another freezing night. The high Andes soften into a vast plateau of red rock and wide sky. You are now in the American Southwest, where winter arrives differently. Days can still be bright and clear, sunlight washing across mesas and canyons, but when the sun dips below the horizon, the temperature falls quickly. Frost settles along sandstone ledges and cold air pools in low places. You walk toward a cluster of stone structures perched along a cliff face. Their walls are built from carefully shaped blocks fitted together with mortar. Some rooms are tucked beneath overhangs partially sheltered by the natural rock above. This is the world of the ancestral Puebloans, whose cliff dwellings and pueblos demonstrate a deep understanding of landscape and climate. Archaeological research confirms that many ancestral Puebloan communities, especially during the late 1st and early 2nd millennium, constructed multi-room complexes within cliff alcoves. Sites such as Mesa Verde preserve these dwellings in remarkable detail, revealing how placement within rock overhangs provided protection from wind and precipitation. You step into a kiva, a circular chamber partially sunk into the ground. A ladder leads downward through a roof opening. As you descend, the air changes. The temperature feels more stable, less affected by the wind that sweeps across the canyon rim. The kiva is round, its walls built from stone, its floor below ground level. A small hearth sits at the center with a deflector stone positioned to guide airflow. Ventilation shafts are carefully aligned to draw fresh air in while allowing smoke to escape. The design reflects careful observation and refinement. You sit on the built-in bench that runs along the interior wall. The space feels intimate and steady. Even without a large fire, the partially subterranean structure maintains a more consistent temperature than open air. Mainstream archaeological evidence shows that kivas serve ceremonial and communal functions, yet they also provided practical benefits in winter. The lowered floor and thick walls moderated temperature extremes, making them suitable gathering places during cold months. You run your fingers along the stone surface and feel its cool solidity. The earth behind the walls acts as insulation. The overhanging cliff above shields the structure from direct snowfall and reduces exposure to wind. There is a compelling detail uncovered in excavations. Some kivas include a small hole in the floor called a sipapu, symbolizing an origin point in Pueblo cosmology. While primarily spiritual in meaning, its presence reminds you that underground space often carries layered significance, blending survival with belief. Researchers continue to explore how climatic shifts, including prolonged droughts and colder intervals, influence the placement and design of Pueblo and settlements. Some argue that environmental pressures played a significant role in architectural adaptation, while others emphasize social and political factors. The conversation remains dynamic. You climb back up and enter one of the cliff rooms. The walls are thick, constructed from sandstone blocks that absorb and release heat gradually. During winter days, sunlight reflecting off canyon walls can warm these rooms slightly. At night, the mass of stone slows heat loss. The cliff alcove acts as a natural umbrella. Snow accumulates on the canyon rim but may not reach the sheltered dwellings below. Wind currents shift above the overhang, reducing direct exposure. You lean against the wall and listen to the canyon. The vast openness outside contrasts with the contained calm inside. The difference is subtle yet meaningful. Some early explorers were astonished by the location of these cliff dwellings, perched high above canyon floors. A few even speculated wildly about their origins. Modern archaeology, through careful excavation and dating, has clarified their development within the broader Pueblo and cultural tradition. You imagine a winter evening within this cliff community. Smoke rises gently from rooftop openings. Families gather in rooms connected by small doorways. The kiva below offers a warmer, more stable environment for communal gatherings. The cliff face itself becomes part of the architecture, contributing both protection and insulation. The semi-subterranean kiva represents another expression of underground design. It is not hidden entirely beneath earth like Cappadocia's cities, nor simply a storage cellar. It is a communal chamber shaped by climate and culture. As night settles across the canyon, stars appear in a clear sky. Frost forms along exposed ledges. Inside the kiva, the air cools slowly rather than sharply. The earth around the chamber moderates the descent into cold. You descend once more into the circular space and sit quietly. The ladder above frames a patch of dark sky. The walls curve gently around you, their mass steady and reassuring. Across continents, the instinct remains familiar. When winter lowers its temperature and the wind begins to bite, you look for shelter not only from above but from within the land itself. Here in the canyon, surrounded by stone and earth, you sense again that resilience often lies in partnership with the ground. Outside the desert, night deepens. Inside the kiva, warmth lingers softly, allowing life to continue in measured calm. The canyon walls dissolve into dense forest and endless stretches of snow. You are now in the vast expanse of Russia, where winter is not a passing inconvenience but a defining force. The air itself feels heavier, colder, as if it carries the memory of countless frozen seasons. Snow blankets the ground in thick layers, and the sky hangs low and pale. You walk toward a small clearing, where a structure rises barely above the surface. From a distance, it appears as a low mound with a simple timber roof. Smoke curls faintly from a narrow opening. This is a zemlyanka, an earth shelter used for centuries across parts of Eastern Europe and Russia. Historical records and archaeological findings confirm that zemlyanki were commonly built by peasants and later by soldiers during times of hardship. These semi-subterranean huts were dug into the ground, reinforced with logs and covered with earth. Their design provided insulation against extreme cold, particularly during long continental winters. You step down into the shelter through a low entrance. The shift in temperature is immediate. Outside, the air stings your face and freezes moisture in your breath. Inside, it feels comparatively mild, though still cool. The walls are lined with logs, their outer sides pressed against packed soil. You reach out and touch the wood. It is solid, faintly warm from the heat of a small stove in the corner. The earthen covering above acts as a thick insulating blanket. Snow resting on top only adds to the effect ceiling in warmth. In the centre of the room stands a simple iron stove. Its glow is modest but steady. Because the shelter is partially below ground and relatively compact, the stove does not need to burn fiercely to maintain livable conditions. There is a vivid historical detail from accounts of 19th century rural life in Russia. Travellers describe visiting Zemlyanki where families endured winter in tight quarters, relying on thick walls and communal heat to survive temperatures that could plunge far below freezing. These shelters were not elegant, but they were effective. Some researchers have examined how widely Zemlyanki were used outside of emergency situations. While they are often associated with poverty or wartime necessity, evidence suggests that in certain forested regions they were part of seasonal patterns, especially for logging communities. The extent of their everyday use continues to be studied through regional surveys. You sit on a rough wooden bench along the wall. The ceiling is low, forcing you to bow your head slightly. This compression of space helps retain heat, preventing warm air from rising too far above the living area. The smell inside is a mixture of wood smoke, damp soil, and wool. It is earthy and honest. Outside, wind moves through the trees, carrying fine snow across the clearing. Inside, the sound is softened by the layers of soil. Zemlyanki gained renewed prominence during the Second World War, when soldiers on the Eastern Front dug similar shelters to protect themselves from brutal winters. Photographs and diaries from that period document how essential these earth-covered huts were for survival in sub-zero conditions. You lean back against the wall and feel the quiet strength of earth and timber surrounding you. The ground absorbs and slows the movement of cold air. Even when outside temperatures drop sharply at night, the interior cools gradually. There is an ongoing discussion among historians about how climate variability influenced the persistence of such shelters in rural Russia. The long duration of harsh winters likely reinforced traditional building practices that prioritized insulation and earth integration. You glance toward a small window opening covered with cloth. Pale light filters through faintly. Frost may coat the forest outside, but within the Zemlyanka the air remains comparatively stable. Snow accumulates atop the roof, adding another layer of insulation. What might seem burdensome from above becomes beneficial to below. The shelter blends into its surroundings, almost disappearing beneath winter's blanket. You imagine a family gathered around the stove as darkness settles early. Boots dry near the heat. Thick coats hang from wooden pegs. The warmth from the stove radiates outward, held in place by the earthen walls. The Zemlyanka represents a pragmatic response to extreme climate. It does not aspire to grandeur, it seeks endurance. By lowering the living space into the ground and covering it with soil builders, harness the steady temperature of the earth. You close your eyes briefly and listen to the muffled hush of snowfall. The world above may be gripped by severe cold, but down here the difference is palpable. Across the forests of Russia, from peasant villages to wartime encampments, this humble underground shelter has played a quiet but vital role in survival. The pattern is unmistakable by now. When winter grows relentless, humanity turns to the ground, trusting in its mass and moderation. You remain seated on the bench, the stove glowing gently nearby, aware that beneath layers of snow and soil, life continues in fragile but steady warmth. The Russian forest fades into a different landscape, one shaped by minarets, domes, and bustling trade routes that stretch across continents. You find yourself within the Ottoman world, where winters could be surprisingly cold in cities like Istanbul, Bursa, or further inland in Anatolia. Snow dusts tiled rooftops and frost settles along courtyard fountains. You walk through a stone archway into the cool interior of a large vaulted chamber built partly below ground level. The air is noticeably steadier than outside, less prone to sudden gusts. This is an ice house or storage vault known in various forms across the Ottoman lands. While some were designed primarily to preserve ice collected during winter for use in warmer months, their underground construction also created stable environments during cold seasons. Historical documentation and surviving structures confirm that subterranean ice houses were constructed in parts of the Ottoman Empire, drawing on earlier Persian and Byzantine precedents. thick masonry walls and earth covering insulated stored ice and food, maintaining consistent temperatures year-round. You descend a few steps and notice the chill deepens slightly, but without the sharp bite of open air. The stone walls are massive, pressing against the surrounding soil. Light filters through a small opening above, illuminating the curved ceiling. There is something almost serene about this chamber. Even when snow swirls across city streets down here, the air barely shifts. The mass of stone and earth moderates the extremes, sowing both warming and cooling. An intriguing historical detail appears in records describing how ice was transported from mountain regions or harvested from frozen lakes, then packed carefully into these underground vaults with insulating layers of straw. The process required coordination and planning, reflecting the value placed on temperature control in both summer and winter. Architectural historians have explored how Ottoman builders adapted earlier Persian yakhchal designs into local contexts. While not identical in form, both traditions demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of thermal mass and subterranean insulation. The exchange of knowledge across regions remains an area of active research. You walk deeper into the chamber and run your hand along the stone. It feels cool but steady. Even during harsh winters, this environment remains relatively constant, protecting stored food from freezing too hard and preserving delicate items. In some urban homes, smaller underground rooms served similar purposes. These spaces provided refuge for perishable goods and occasionally for people during particularly cold nights. Thick walls and partially buried foundations contributed to comfort in a season when fuel could be costly. You sit quietly on a low stone ledge and imagine a winter evening above. Snow gathers in courtyards. Wind rattles wooden shutters. Down here, the air holds its composure. The design is deliberate, relying on depth and density rather than open flame alone. There has been scholarly examination of how climate fluctuations during certain centuries influenced the expansion of such storage systems. Cooler periods may have made ice harvesting more reliable, while warmer phases increased demand for preserved cooling. The interplay between environment and architecture continues to be examined through historical climate data and structural analysis. The vaulted ceiling curves gracefully overhead, distributing weight evenly into the surrounding soil. The geometry is not merely aesthetic, it supports the mass of earth above, ensuring stability. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. Sound from the street is distant, softened by layers of masonry. The chamber feels removed from time, steady and controlled. This underground approach reflects another variation in the story of winter resilience. Rather than carving entire living quarters beneath the surface, Ottoman builders often created specialized subterranean environments dedicated to preservation and thermal balance. The principle remains consistent. Earth and stone resist rapid temperature change. Whether protecting ice from melting or shielding supplies from frost, the underground vault serves as a buffer between human need and climatic unpredictability. You rise and climb back toward the entrance. The air grows sharper with each step upward. Snowflakes drift across the open courtyard beyond. As you pause at the threshold, you sense once more that across empires and eras, people have turned to depth and density for stability. In the quiet of this vaulted chamber, winter's fluctuations feel distant, moderated by the thoughtful design and layers of earth. The vaulted chamber recedes into memory as you travel farther east across high plateaus and ancient trade routes into the heart of Persia. Winter here can be surprisingly sharp, especially in desert regions where daytime warmth gives way to freezing nights. The sky stretches wide and clear, stars blazing against deep darkness. Once the sun disappears, you approach a structure rising from the earth like a rounded dome of mud brick. Its thick walls taper upward, and beneath it lies a deep subterranean pit. This is a yakhchal, an architectural marvel developed in ancient Iran to store ice and preserve food through both summer heat and winter cold. Archaeological and historical evidence shows that yakhchals were used as early as the first millennium BCE, refined over centuries by Persian engineers. These structures combined above-ground domes with deep underground chambers insulated by specially formulated mortar that resisted heat transfer. You step inside through a low entrance and descend into the cool interior. The temperature drops gradually, becoming noticeably colder but stable. Even in winter, this chamber maintains consistency, protected by thick earthen walls and depth below the surface. The dome above you is constructed from mud brick and a unique mortar known as sarouge, made from clay sand, lime ash, and sometimes goat hair. This mixture created a water-resistant and insulating surface that contributed to the yak chal's efficiency. There is a fascinating historical account describing how ice was formed in shallow pools during cold desert nights, then harvested and stored in these underground chambers. The ice could last well into summer. The ingenuity required to produce and preserve ice in arid climates speaks to a deep understanding of environmental rhythms. Architectural historians continue to analyze how Persian builders achieved such remarkable thermal control without modern technology. The combination of thick walls' depth and ventilation channels created an environment resistant to extreme temperature swings. The precise balance between structural design and material composition remains a subject of ongoing technical study. You run your hand along the interior wall. It feels cool and slightly textured. The mass of earth surrounding the chamber acts as a shield, slowing both warming and cooling. In winter, when outside temperatures can fall sharply at Balmhays, the underground pit protects stored goods from excessive freezing. In summer, the same design prevents heat from penetrating quickly. The yak chal represents a year-round solution rooted in the principles of thermal mass and insulation. You pause and listen. The silence is profound, broken only by the faint echo of your own movement. Above ground, wind may sweep across open desert. Down here, the air barely stirs. Some researchers have explored the possibility that knowledge of such structures influenced later architectural traditions in neighbouring regions. Trade routes carried not only goods but ideas. The extent of this influence continues to be examined through comparative studies. You imagine a winter evening in ancient Persia. The desert cools rapidly after sunset. Frost may form on exposed ground. Within the yak chal, supplies remain protected, insulated by layers of earth and carefully engineered mortar. The dome above distributes weight evenly, ensuring stability despite the deep excavation beneath. Its conical form reduces surface area exposed to sun and wind, contributing to temperature control. You climb slightly upward within the chamber and feel the gradual shift in air. The deeper you remain, the more stable the environment becomes. This structure demonstrates a mature understanding of underground design. It is not a simple pit or cellar. It is a carefully calculated system integrating depth, mass and airflow. You rest your hand on the cool wall and reflect on how diverse cultures have independently arrived at similar principles. Whether in volcanic cliffs, frozen forests, or desert plateaus, the solution to extreme climates often involves partnership with the earth. Outside, the stars shine sharply against a black sky. The desert night grows colder by the hour. Inside the yak chal, the temperature holds steady, resistant to rapid decline. You ascend toward the entrance and step back into the open air. The cold feels sharper after the moderated stillness below. As you look back at the dome rising from the earth, you sense again that underground architecture is not merely about hiding from winter. It is about understanding the ground as a reservoir of steadiness. Across centuries of Persian innovation, the yak chal stands as a testament to that insight. Beneath its dome and within its depth, winter's extremes are tempered by thoughtful design and the quiet strength of soil. The desert plateau softens into rolling green fields and grey stone walls. Bells toll faintly in the distance, their echoes drifting across a frost-touched valley. You find yourself within the grounds of a medieval monastery somewhere in Western Europe. Winter has settled over cloisters and orchards alike. The air smells of damp stone wood smoke and cold earth. From the outside, the monastery appears solid and self-contained, its walls thick and fortified. But as you step through a heavy oak door and into a narrow corridor, you sense that much of its quiet resilience lies below ground. You descend worn stone steps into a vaulted cellar beneath the refectory. The air cools but steadies, losing the sharp edge that clings to the courtyard above. Candles flicker softly along the walls, illuminating rows of barrels and sacks carefully arranged. Monastic communities across medieval Europe routinely constructed extensive cellars and undercrofts beneath their buildings. Surviving abbeys in France, England, and Germany preserve these subterranean chambers which served as storage spaces for wine-grain cheese and preserved meats. The consistent temperature of earth-sheltered rooms protected precious supplies through harsh winters. You pause at the base of the staircase and inhale. The scent of aging wine mingles with stone and faint traces of smoke drifting down from kitchens above. The walls are thick, formed of stone pressed firmly against surrounding soil. Unlike simple household cellars, monastic undercrofts could be expansive, supported by ribbed vaults and stone columns. Their architecture reflects both practicality and a quiet sense of order. The geometry distributes weight evenly, ensuring stability beneath heavy masonry. There is an interesting detail preserved in some monastic records. During particularly severe winters, brothers tasked with infirmary care occasionally moved vulnerable members closer to lower-level chambers where temperatures were more stable. Though not common practice, the option underscores the value of subterranean moderation. Architectural historians continue to examine how climate variations influenced monastic design. Cooler phases during the later medieval period may have reinforced the importance of insulated storage and thick walls. The degree to which climatic change directly shaped construction choices remains a topic of careful study. You walk along the cellar and run your hand across a stone column. It is cool but not icy. The surrounding earth buffers the chamber from rapid temperature shifts, keeping it above freezing even when snow lies deep outside. The monastery above is quiet. In the cloister, frost glistens along arches. Inside the cellar, the air holds steady composure. Supplies stored here ensure survival not only of individuals but of the entire community through winter scarcity. Some abbeys also included partially underground heating systems for specific rooms, though far simpler than Roman hypocausts. In certain cases, flues carried warmth from kitchen hearths through adjacent walls. The interplay between heat and mass was understood through experience rather than theory. You sit briefly on a wooden crate and listen to the muted hush. Footsteps echo faintly overhead. The rhythm of monastic life continues even in cold months. Prayer, study, and labour persist within walls that draw strength from the earth itself. In some monasteries built into hillsides, entire sections of lower floors were backed directly into slopes, adding insulation along one side. This integration with terrain reduced exposure and enhanced stability. There has been scholarly discussion about whether monasteries with their resources and relative permanence were among the most climate-resilient institutions of medieval Europe. Thick masonry, underground storage, and communal heating all contributed to endurance during prolonged cold spells. You glance toward a small grated window near the ceiling set high in the wall. Pale light filters through, hinting at snow in the courtyard beyond. The world above feels distant, softened by layers of stone. The undercroft is not dramatic. It does not inspire awe like a carved subterranean city, yet it embodies a quiet wisdom. Depth and density provide constancy when air and wind do not. As evening approaches, candles burn lower. The cellar remains calm, indifferent to the sharpness of winter outside. Supplies rest securely within its steady embrace. You rise and climb back up the steps. The air grows cooler and more variable with each upward stride. Frost clings to cloister stones. Breath clouds before you. Behind you, beneath thick walls and vaulted ceilings, the earth continues its patient work, moderating extremes, preserving life. Across empires, deserts, mountains, and monasteries, the pattern holds. When winter presses close, people draw upon the ground's quiet strength. Here in the heart of a medieval abbey, you recognize once more that survival is often rooted not in spectacle, but in steady foundations laid deep beneath your feet. Winters could linger long, and winters could linger long, and rivers sometimes froze hard enough to bear markets and crowds. Smoke hangs low between buildings. Frost creeps along window panes from the inside, tracing delicate patterns like ferns. You stand in a narrow townhouse, its upper stories leaning slightly over the street. The room around you is modest, warmed by a small hearth that struggles against drafts slipping through gaps in timber frames. Fuel is expensive. Wood must be rationed carefully. Beneath your boots lies a narrow staircase leading downward. Across cities such as London, Amsterdam and Prague, urban houses from the 16th and 17th centuries commonly included basements or half-sunken lower floors. Property records, surviving structures and municipal surveys confirm their prevalence. These spaces were often used for storage workshops or small-scale trade, yet they also provided more stable temperatures than exposed upper rooms. You descend into the basement and feel the shift immediately. The air is cooler than the hearthroom, but less volatile. It does not carry the sharp drafts that roam above. Thick brick or stone walls press against surrounding soil, which buffers the space from rapid swings in temperature. You run your hand along the wall. It feels damp in places, but solid. Barrels, crates, and sacks are stacked carefully along one side. In some homes, entire families moved their bedding downstairs during particularly severe cold spells to escape icy winds that whipped through poorly insulated upper floors. There is a vivid detail preserved in accounts from London during the 17th century. During some of the coldest winters, people reported water freezing in bedrooms, while cellars remained comparatively moderate. It is a small but telling reminder of how depth can soften extremes. Urban historians have examined how the cooler phases of the Little Ice Age influenced building practices and household routines. While it is difficult to draw direct lines between climate data and architectural design, the correlation between colder decades and increased attention to insulation is compelling. You sit on a wooden crate and listen. The noise of the street above becomes muted, softened by layers of brick and earth. Outside vendors hurry through slushy lanes. Inside the basement holds its quiet steadiness. In port cities, some basements were built partially below the water table, requiring careful drainage systems. Builders installed channels and pumps to manage moisture. These adaptations reveal how urban dwellers balance the benefits of earth insulation with the risks of dampness. There is also a curious anecdote from Amsterdam. In certain canal houses, lower levels were used not only for the storage but for specialized trades such as brewing or dyeing processes that benefited from consistent temperatures. The subterranean environment offered a degree of predictability valuable in both winter and summer. Researchers continue to analyze how economic status shaped access to such spaces. Wealthier families might have deeper, better constructed basements, while poorer residents occupied cramped lower rooms with minimal ventilation. The underground could be refuge or hardship depending on circumstance. You lean back against the wall and close your eyes briefly. The air feels dense and still. The earth beyond the bricks acts as a slow-moving buffer resisting the sharp bite of wind outside. Above the hearth may flare and fade with shifting drafts. Down here, temperature changes gradually. The difference may be only a few degrees yet in winter. That margin can be meaningful. Some municipal regulations from early modern cities addressed the use of basements, especially in relation to sanitation and overcrowding. Authorities recognize both the utility and the potential hazards of subterranean living spaces. The balance between comfort and risk remain delicate. You rise and climb halfway up the stairs. A gust of cold air from the open door brushes your face. Returning below, you feel the comparative calm once more. The urban basement represents another evolution in the long story of underground adaptation. It is not carved dramatically into cliffs or sculpted into domes. It is integrated into dense city life, quietly moderating temperature while commerce and daily routines continue above. As evening falls, lanterns flicker along narrow streets. Frost thickens on rooftops. In the basement, barrels rest in steady air, and perhaps a family settles in closer to the ground to escape the sharpest chill. Across monasteries, deserts, fjords, and now city blocks, the lesson endures. When winter grows severe, depth offers composure. You stand in the dim basement and sense once more that beneath layers of brick and soil, the earth continues its patient work, softening extremes while life carries on overhead. The crowded European streets dissolve into open land once more. The air smells different here, cleaner edged with pine and wood smoke. You are in frontier America, where winters can stretch long and merciless across plains and wooded valleys. Snow drifts against log cabins. Wind rattles shutters with relentless determination. You approach a modest homestead, standing at the edge of a clearing. The cabin is built from rough-hewn logs chinked with clay to block drafts. Smoke rises from a stone chimney, but the fire inside must be fed constantly to keep the chill at bay. Near the cabin, partly hidden by snow, you notice a small mound of earth with a wooden door set into its side. This is a root cellar. Historical records and archaeological surveys will confirm that settlers across 18th and 19th century North America commonly constructed root cellars partially or entirely below ground. These spaces preserved vegetables such as potatoes, carrots, and turnips through winter months by maintaining a cool but stable temperature. You push open the wooden door and step down a short staircase carved into packed soil. The air inside is noticeably steadier than outside. It is cool but not biting. The earth walls surround you, their mass buffering against sudden drops in temperature. Shelves line the walls, holding jars and crates. Potatoes rest in bins layered with straw. Apples are stored carefully to prevent bruising. In winter, when fields lie dormant and snow blankets the land, these cellars become lifelines. There is a practical ingenuity in their placement. Many were dug into hillsides to take advantage of natural slopes, reducing excavation effort and improving drainage. Others were built as standalone mounds covered with thick layers of soil for insulation. Some diaries from frontier families describe how during especially harsh winters, children were sent to fetch vegetables from the cellar only after bundling up carefully, as the brief trip outside could be painfully cold. The cellar itself, though cool, felt almost comfortable compared to the windswept yard. Architectural historians examining earlier American settlements have noted that root cellars reflect both European traditions and adaptation to local conditions. The precise shapes and materials varied by region, yet the principle of earth insulation remained consistent. You brush your hand along the packed dirt wall. It feels solid and faintly damp. The temperature here changes slowly, protected by depth and density. Even when outside air plunges well below freezing, the interior of the cellar often remains just above that threshold. There has been discussion among researchers about how frontier communities balanced food preservation with the risk of freezing during extreme cold spells. Some cellars included additional insulating layers of straw or wooden lining to moderate temperature further. The effectiveness of these measures depended on soil type and depth. You sit briefly on a wooden crate and imagine the scene above ground. Snow whips across the clearing. The cabin creaks under gusts of wind. Inside the cellar, the air holds steady. Supplies rest safely within earthen walls. Root cellars were not typically living spaces, yet their existence shaped winter survival profoundly. Without reliable preservation, crops harvested in autumn would spoil or freeze, leaving families vulnerable. In some cases, small spring houses were built near water sources, using the constant temperature of flowing water to enhance cooling. These too relied on the principle of thermal stability provided by earth and groundwater. You climb back towards the entrance and feel the sharp contrast as cold air brushes your face. Snow crunches underfoot. The cabin door swings slightly in the wind. You step inside the log home and notice how quickly warmth dissipates when the fire burns low. Drafts slip through seams despite careful chinking. The root cellar outside, though colder overall, feels less volatile. The frontier demanded resilience and resourcefulness. Earth-sheltered storage became essential in regions where supply lines were thin and winter espor. Giving. Some scholars have examined how the spread of such cellars reflects cultural exchange among settlers, indigenous communities, and immigrant groups. While the basic concept was widespread in Europe, adaptation to American soils and climates produced regional variations. You glance once more toward the small mound near the cabin. Beneath that simple door lies a quiet chamber that stands between sustenance and scarcity. As evening descends across frontier America, frost creeps along window glass. The fire inside the cabin glows, but outside the root cellar waits in steady silence, guarding its contents. Across centuries and continents, the ground continues to serve as a patient partner. Whether sheltering families directly or preserving their harvest, underground spaces soften winter's severity. You wrap your coat tighter and step back toward the cabin, aware that beneath the snow-covered earth, the cellar holds its calm, sustaining life through the cold months ahead. The snow-covered clearing of frontier America fades into a landscape of vast white horizons and low-grey skies. You feel the cold before you even see the settlement. This is the Arctic, where winter stretches for months and darkness lingers long past what feels reasonable. The air is so sharp it seems to ring in your ears. Every breath forms a cloud that hangs briefly before vanishing. You walk across packed snow toward a cluster of low shapes barely rising above the surface. From a distance they appear like gentle humps in the frozen ground. As you draw closer, you notice entrance tunnels cut into the snow and earth leading downward into hidden spaces. In parts of Alaska and northern Canada, indigenous Arctic communities constructed semi-subterranean dwellings using sod driftwood and sometimes whalebone frames. Ethnographic records and archaeological excavations confirm that these homes, often referred to as sod houses or semi-underground winter houses, were common among groups such as the Inupiat and Yupik. Their design conserved precious heat in a climate where temperatures could plunge far below freezing for extended periods. You crouch and move through a narrow entrance tunnel. It slopes gently downward before rising slightly into the main chamber. This tunnel design is intentional. Cold air sinks so the lower entrance traps frigid air in the passage, preventing it from flooding the living area. As you step into the main room, the difference is immediate. The air feels warmer, though still cool. Lamps fueled by seal oil cast a soft golden glow across the interior. The walls are thick with packed sod, layered and reinforced with wooden beams or whalebone ribs. You sit along a raised platform covered with animal skins. The floor lies slightly below the surrounding ground, and the roof is layered with earth and snow. Every surface contributes to insulation. Snow itself becomes an ally, adding another barrier against the wind. A widely recognized anthropological observation is that these semi-subterranean Arctic homes could maintain interior temperatures significantly higher than outside conditions, even with minimal fuel. Body heat from multiple occupants combined with oil lamps and careful construction created a livable microclimate. You press your hand against the sod wall. It feels firm and faintly warm from interior heat. Beyond it, the wind may be howling across open tundra, but inside the chamber, sound is muted, softened by layers of earth. There is a detail noted in some historical accounts that brings a quiet smile. Visitors unfamiliar with these homes sometimes described being surprised by how comfortable they felt once inside, despite the severe cold outside. The contrast could be startling. Researchers continue to examine how these architectural forms evolved over centuries in response to shifting climate patterns and available materials. The balance between snow houses built temporarily and more permanent sod structures reflects seasonal mobility and resource management. You glance toward a small smoke hole near the roof. Ventilation must be managed carefully. Too much airflow wastes precious warmth. Too little risks smoke buildup. Experience guides these decisions more than written plans. Outside, winter night settles deeply. The sky may shimmer with faint aurora. Inside, families gather close together. Storytelling, sewing, and quiet conversation fill the space. The architecture encourages communal warmth. Raised sleeping platforms keep bodies above the coldest air layer near the floor. Some scholars have explored how these homes shaped social organization, reinforcing cooperation and shared responsibility during long winters. The confined space demanded harmony and attentiveness. You shift your weight on the skin-covered platform and feel the gentle warmth retained in the structure. The entrance tunnel, the layered sod, the low ceiling all work together to conserve energy. Unlike tall timber houses exposed to Arctic winds, these dwellings hug the ground. They minimize surface area exposed to cold air. The earth and snow form a protective shell that resists rapid heat loss. You imagine stepping back outside for a moment. The cold hits instantly sharp and relentless, Returning inside, you sense once again the wisdom alluring living space beneath the surface. Across frozen tundra and along icy coastlines, underground and semi-subterranean architecture becomes not just helpful but essential. In such climates, exposure can be deadly within hours. Insulation is survival. You sit quietly as the oil lamp flickers. The air inside feels steady compared to the biting cold beyond the tunnel. The Arctic example brings the story to one of its starkest extremes. Here, winter is not occasional inconvenience. It is the dominant season, and once more humanity answers by turning toward the ground, shaping it into shelter. Within this sod-lined chamber beneath layers of snow, you rest in a pocket of warmth carved from the frozen world above. The Arctic hush gives way to the rumble of distant artillery and the uneasy silence of a city at war. Snow drifts along shattered rooftops, windows are boarded. The sky is a dull winter grey, heavy with smoke. You stand on a street in Eastern Europe during the 20th century where cold and conflict have collided with devastating force. People move quickly, heads lowered, coats pulled tight. Sirens wail faintly in the distance. Above ground, winter air cuts sharply and danger can fall from the sky without warning. You follow a small group toward a heavy door set into the side of a stone building. It opens to reveal a stairwell leading downward. Basements and cellars, once used for storage and trade, now serve another purpose. They are shelters. Photographs and civilian accounts from cities such as Stalingrad, Warsaw and Berlin confirm that during harsh winter campaigns of the Second World War, civilians and soldiers alike relied heavily on underground spaces for both protection from bombardment and insulation against freezing temperatures. Thick masonry and surrounding soil offered a measure of safety when above ground life became perilous. You descend into the basement. The air is dim and close, but steadier than the icy wind outside. Candles flicker along walls. People sit on crates and blankets huddled together. The ground around the foundation absorbs and slows the penetration of cold air. There is a striking detail preserved in wartime diaries. Some residents wrote about how despite fear and discomfort, the basement felt strangely reassuring compared to the exposed streets. The earth and stone created a sense of enclosure that muffled both explosions and winter gusts. Military engineers also constructed purpose-built dugouts along front lines. These were often reinforced with timber and covered with layers of soil to protect against shrapnel and frost. Field manuals from the era include instructions for building such shelters efficiently in frozen ground. Researchers studying wartime architecture have examined how the dual pressures of climate and combat shaped underground construction. While protection from attack was the primary goal, insulation against severe cold became equally crucial on certain fronts. The relative emphasis varied by region and circumstance. You sit on a wooden bench pressed against a basement wall. It is cool but solid. Above, snow may be falling through broken roofs. Down here, the air changes slowly rather than abruptly. In some cities, entire subway systems became improvised winter refuges. Underground rail tunnels provided not only shelter from bombs, but a more stable temperature environment. During the London Blitz, for example, thousands of residents slept on underground platforms. Contemporary photographs show families wrapped in blankets beneath arched ceilings insulated by layers of earth. The combination of depth and communal presence generated warmth. Body heat accumulated in confined spaces, raising temperatures enough to make long nights survivable. There has been ongoing scholarly analysis of how civilian resilience was shaped by access to such underground infrastructure. Cities with extensive basement networks or transport tunnels often fared better in providing winter refuge. The interplay between urban design and survival continues to attract academic attention. You close your eyes briefly and listen. The muffled thud of distant artillery is softened by layers of masonry. Snow and wind become background noise, rather than immediate threats. The basement smells faintly of damp stone and smoke. It is not comfortable in a luxurious sense. It is cramped and anxious. Yet compared to the exposed street, it offers a vital margin of safety and thermal stability. In rural areas, families dug earth-covered bunkers when buildings were destroyed. These makeshift shelters relied on the same principle you've encountered again and again. Lower the living space into the ground, cover it with soil, trust the mass of earth to moderate extremes. Some historians have examined how these wartime adaptations echoed much older traditions of earth-sheltered housing. Under duress, communities often return instinctively to proven solutions. You stand and climb partway up the stairs, the cold brushes your face sharply, smoke drifts through broken window frames. You descend again into the dim steadiness below. Even in the chaos of modern conflict, underground architecture retains its ancient role. It tempers winter's severity while shielding against other dangers. As night deepens over the war-torn city, families remain gathered in basements and tunnels. The ground above may tremble with distant blasts, but below the temperature remains comparatively stable. Across centuries of peace and conflict, the lesson persists. When both climate and circumstance grow hostile, humanity turns downward, seeking steadiness in stone and soil. In this shadowed cellar beneath layers of rubble and snow, you sense once more that survival often rests on foundations laid beneath the surface. The echo of distant sirens fades, replaced by a quieter kind of inquiry. You are no longer standing in a specific village or city. Instead, you find yourself in a thoughtful pause, considering what all these places share. From Arctic sod houses to Persian ice chambers, from Viking turf halls to Korean heated floors, a pattern has been repeating beneath your feet. You kneel and press your palm flat against the ground. It feels solid, steady, indifferent to the gusts of wind moving across its surface. Winter rages above, yet a few feet below, temperature remains comparatively constant. This is not magic. It is physics. Modern measurements show that in many climates, soil temperature just a meter or two below the surface fluctuates far less dramatically than the air above. Even during severe cold snaps, the Earth retains residual warmth from previous seasons. This phenomenon is known as thermal mass and geothermal buffering. Though ancient builders did not use those terms, they observed the effect with quite accuracy. You imagine digging a shallow trench in the frozen ground. At the surface, frost bites sharply. A little deeper, the chill softens. Deeper still, the air feels almost mild compared to the wind outside. This gradient offered generations a clue. Stability lives below. There is a compelling anecdote from early scientific observers in the 17th century who began recording soil temperatures in winter. Some noted with surprise how little the ground changed compared to daily air readings. Their data confirmed what farmers and builders already sensed intuitively. Researchers in architectural history often point out that earth-sheltered design reduces surface area exposed to extreme air. Less exposed wall means less opportunity for heat to escape. The mass of soil absorbs warmth slowly and releases it gradually. The result is a dampening of extremes. You sit quietly and imagine a winter storm above you. Snow whips sideways, branches creak under weight. Inside a partially buried room, however, the air shifts gently. It cools, yes, but not with the sudden cruelty of open exposure. There is ongoing discussion among building scientists about how ancient methods compare to modern insulation materials. Some argue that traditional earth-sheltered designs offer remarkable efficiency when adapted thoughtfully, while others emphasize the challenges of moisture management and ventilation. The conversation continues as contemporary architects revisit old principles. You brush a bit of soil between your fingers and consider how simple the core idea is. The ground acts as a thermal battery. It stores energy over time. In summer it absorbs heat. In winter it releases stored warmth slowly. Even in cold regions, the subsurface temperature often remains several degrees higher than the coldest air. There is also a psychological dimension to this stability. Rapid temperature swings can feel alarming. Gradual change feels manageable. Underground spaces create that gradual shift, softening the edges of winter. Some modern experiments with earth-sheltered homes have demonstrated significant reductions in heating demand compared to fully exposed structures. While ancient builders did not measure kilowatt hours, they measured comfort in lived experience. You lean back and imagine the variety of forms this principle has taken. pit houses carved into less cliffs, turf walls layered against Atlantic winds, stone cellars beneath medieval towns, Arctic homes with entrance tunnels that trap cold air below living platforms. The materials differ, the climates vary, yet the underlying logic remains consistent. Use mass, reduce exposure, slow the exchange of heat. There has been thoughtful examination among environmental historians about whether certain periods of intensified cold accelerated innovation in underground design. While causation can be difficult to prove definitively, correlations between cooler decades and architectural adaptation are suggestive. You feel the ground beneath you and sense its quiet resilience. It does not respond dramatically to each passing cloud. It changes slowly, almost imperceptibly. Above, winter may bring frost fares on frozen rivers or blizzards across plains. Below, the soil maintains a measured composure. Modern passive solar architecture sometimes integrates earth berms and partially buried walls, drawing consciously from ancient strategies. The rediscovery of these methods reflects a renewed appreciation for the Earth's stabilizing properties. You close your eyes and picture each place you have visited in this journey. The volcanic caves of Cappadocia, the Arctic sod chambers, the desert courtyards carved downward into sand-coloured earth. Each is a variation on the same quiet partnership. There is humility in this approach. Instead of building ever taller in defiance of winter, people chose to lean inward to borrow from the mass beneath their feet. You inhale slowly and notice the subtle warmth that lingers just below the surface. It is not dramatic, it does not blaze, but it endures. Across centuries, underground architecture has demonstrated that survival in pre-modern winters was often less about conquering cold and more about moderating it. The science behind it is elegant in its simplicity. Depth equals stability, mass equals moderation. You rest your hand on the soil once more and feel gratitude for the quiet constancy it offers. Winter above may howl and freeze and test endurance. Beneath the earth waits patiently holding a reserve of steadiness for those willing to descend. The quiet reflection on soil and physics slowly widens into something more symbolic. You remain seated close to the ground, but your thoughts drift through centuries of stories and beliefs. Across cultures, going underground has never been purely practical. It has carried meaning. You picture a winter night in a Norse turf house where elders recount tales of realms beneath the earth. You imagine a kiva in the American Southwest where the small sipapu in the floor represents emergence from an underworld. You recall the vaulted monasteries where crypts rest below chapels echoing with centuries of prayer. Living partly below ground has often blurred the boundary between survival and symbolism. Archaeological evidence shows that many ancient societies built ceremonial or sacred spaces below the surface. While their primary purpose was spiritual, the choice of depth often provided thermal stability as a secondary benefit. The interplay between meaning and moderation appears again and again. You descend into a dim chamber carved long ago, lit only by flickering firelight. The air feels steady, neither harshly cold nor dramatically warm. The walls curve around you like an embrace. In ancient Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries involved rituals connected to cycles of life and rebirth. Although not always fully underground, certain sacred spaces were partially enclosed or set into earth. Scholars studying these sites continue to examine how architectural depth reinforced symbolic themes of descent and renewal. You lean your back against cool stone and sense how the psychological effect of enclosure complements physical warmth. The ceiling lowers the sky, the world feels contained. There is a curious historical observation that in some regions, burial grounds and dwellings were located near one another, reinforcing a sense of continuity between the living and the earth. While not universally practiced, this proximity suggests that underground space held layered meanings beyond mere shelter. Cultural historians often explore how the earth has been viewed simultaneously as a place of origin and return. The warmth found below ground during winter may have deepened these associations. Stability becomes metaphor as well as material fact. You imagine an Andean family gathered in a semi-embedded stone house telling stories of mountain spirits while frost forms outside. The earth behind their walls provides insulation, but also a sense of belonging within the landscape. In some Arctic traditions, winter houses were contrasted with summer tents, not only in function but in social rhythm. The enclosed underground dwelling encouraged close community interaction during the darkest months. Ethnographers continue to study how seasonal architecture shaped social bonds. You sit quietly and consider how depth changes perception. Sounds soften, light dims, temperature steadies, the senses adjust. Winter feels less vast, less overwhelming. There has been thoughtful analysis among anthropologists about whether repeated seasonal descent into Earth-sheltered spaces influence mythic imagery of underworlds and hidden realms. While causation is difficult to establish, the parallel is intriguing. You trace a finger along the wall of this imagined chamber, and notice how touch becomes more prominent when sight is limited. The texture of stone, the warmth of shared bodies, the faint scent of smoke all grow sharper in awareness. Some early Christian crypts were built beneath churches not only for burial, but for symbolic proximity to foundational narratives. Their underground placement naturally benefited from stable temperatures protecting remains and sacred objects. You picture winter pressing down from above, snow layering thickly across fields and rooftops. Below, in chambers carved into soil or rock, communities gather in warmth and quiet. There is something almost instinctive about lowering oneself when faced with relentless cold. It feels like returning to a core, retreating inward. Architectural historians can sometimes caution against over-romanticizing these connections between symbolism and shelter, yet they acknowledge that built environments often reflect layered purposes. A kiva can be both ceremonial and thermally practical. A turf house can be both home and landscape. You breathe slowly in the dimness and sense that underground architecture speaks not only to climate but to identity. Across cultures, descent into Earth during winter may have reinforced a feeling of protection, of being held. The ground that grows food in summer becomes the cradle in winter. As you sit in this quiet space, you realize that resilience is not solely physical. It is also psychological. The steadiness of temperature is mirrored by the steadiness of enclosed space. Winter above continues its cycle, indifferent to human concerns. Beneath, in chambers shaped by intention and belief, life persists. You rise gently and imagine stepping back into open air. The cold greets you sharply, yet you carry with you the memory of depth and calm. Across time and terrain, underground spaces have sheltered not only bodies but stories, rituals, and collective memory. And as winter continues its quiet dominion above you, recognize that the earth below offers more than insulation. It offers continuity, grounding, and a sense of belonging within the cycles of season and survival. You linger in that dim chamber a moment longer, then allow your thoughts to rise back toward the present, where archaeologists brush soil from ancient walls and climate historians pore over tree rings and ice cores. The story of underground winter survival is still being assembled piece by careful piece. Imagine yourself standing at an excavation site on a cold morning. Frost sparkles on the ground. A shallow depression in the earth marks the outline of a long-vanished pit house. To an untrained eye, it might look like nothing more than a stain in the soil. To researchers, it is a blueprint of endurance. Excavations across Europe, Asia, and the Americas have documented countless semi-subterranean structures associated with colder climates. From Neolithic pit houses in Central Europe to Arctic sod dwellings and Russian zemlyanki, the material record consistently shows that lowering living space into the ground reduced exposure to winter extremes. This conclusion is supported by stratigraphic analysis, carbon dating, and architectural reconstruction. You crouch beside the outline of a former wall traced by darker soil where organic materials once stood. The evidence is subtle yet persuasive. Post holes reveal where beams once anchored roofs. Ash layers mark hearths that burn through long winters. There is an ongoing conversation among climate historians about how strongly specific cold phases such as the Little Ice Age drove architectural change. Some argue that communities intensified Earth-sheltered practices during particularly harsh decades. Others caution that cultural continuity and local tradition may explain more than climate alone. The relationship between weather patterns and building choices remains a lively field of inquiry. You pick up a fragment of fired clay from the dig. It might have lined a hearth. It might have been part of a wall. Each piece tells a partial story. A small but intriguing observation emerges from experimental archaeology. When researchers reconstruct pit houses or turf structures and measure interior temperatures during winter, they often find significant moderation compared to above-ground huts of similar size. These controlled experiments lend quantitative support to what historical communities understood intuitively. You imagine standing inside one of these reconstructions as snow falls outside. Sensors record air temperature, humidity, and heat retention. The data confirms that even a shallow depression in the ground can shift the balance between exposure and endurance. Scholars in environmental history continue to examine how underground architecture fits into broader narratives of adaptation. Was it a reactive measure during crisis periods or a proactive strategy embedded in cultural knowledge? The answer likely varies by region and era. You brush soil from your gloves and look across the excavation site. Layers of occupation lie stacked beneath your feet. Each generation built modified and sometimes abandoned structures in response to shifting needs. In some cases, archaeologists debate whether certain depressions represent dwellings or storage pits. The distinction can be subtle. Patterns of wear, artifact distribution, and hearth placement help clarify function, yet interpretation requires caution. You reflect on how much of winter survival depended on factors beyond architecture. Clothing, diet, social organization, and fuel availability all played crucial roles. Underground design was one tool among many, yet it often provided a vital buffer. Modern scholars increasingly integrate paleoclimate data with settlement patterns to understand how communities responded to colder intervals. Ice core samples, tree ring sequences, and sediment records provide context for architectural choices observed in the field. You stand upright and glance at the horizon. The air is cold but manageable. Beneath the surface, traces of past winters linger in charcoal flecks and compacted floors. There is humility in the archaeological process. Rarely does evidence speak in complete sentences. Instead, it offers fragments that must be assembled thoughtfully. The consistent recurrence of earth-sheltered dwellings across cultures suggests that this was not a marginal experiment. It was a recurring solution rediscovered and refined in different landscapes. You imagine the conversations that may have taken place centuries ago. Someone notices that the pit house feels warmer than the surface hut. Another suggests digging a little deeper next season. Knowledge accumulates quietly. Researchers today continue to analyze soil composition, construction techniques, and thermal performance. Their findings illuminate the ingenuity of communities who lacked modern materials yet mastered environmental moderation. As wind brushes across the excavation site, you feel the chill on your cheeks. You look down at the shallow depression and recognize it as more than a hollow. It is a record of adaptation. Across continents and centuries, the pattern emerges clearly. When winters grew severe, many societies turned downward, trusting the steady qualities of Earth. The debate about precise motivations and timing will likely continue. That is the nature of scholarship. Yet the physical evidence remains compelling. You step away from the trench and let your gaze travel across the landscape. Beneath fields and forests lie remnants of shelters that once softened winter's edge. In their quiet persistence, these underground spaces remind you that resilience often leaves its mark not in towering monuments, but in subtle shifts of depth and design. You leave the excavation site behind and step into the present day, where glass towers reflect winter sunlight and central heating hums almost invisibly behind insulated walls. Snow still falls in many of the same places it did centuries ago. The wind still bites across plains and through mountain passes. Yet now many people forget that warmth was once a daily negotiation, and still the old wisdom has not disappeared. You stand before a modern earth-sheltered home built into a gentle hillside. From the front it looks modest, with wide windows facing the low winter sun. From above and behind it is almost invisible, covered in soil and grasses that blend seamlessly into the landscape. Contemporary architectural studies confirm that earth-bermed and fully earth-covered homes can significantly reduce heating demands in cold climates. By surrounding exterior walls with soil, these buildings benefit from the same thermal buffering that protected pit houses and sod dwellings long ago. You walk along the sloping roof, now blanketed with a thin layer of snow. Beneath your feet lies a living space that maintains a relatively stable temperature throughout winter. Inside, walls backed by earth lose heat slowly. Drafts are minimal. The air feels still and composed. You step through the entrance and notice how natural light fills the front rooms while the rear walls disappear into the hillside. The design combines modern materials with ancient principles. Insulated concrete vapor barriers and drainage systems address moisture concerns that challenged earlier builders. There is a small but delightful detail often mentioned by homeowners who choose this style. Many describe how during winter storms they can hear the wind outside but feel almost none of its effect indoors. The earth absorbs the noise as well as the temperature swings. Architectural theorists continue to explore how traditional underground techniques can inform sustainable design. Some emphasize the environmental benefits of reduced energy consumption. Others note the psychological comfort that comes from living in a space partially embraced by the land. You sit near a large window overlooking a snow-covered field. Sunlight streams in, warming the interior through passive solar gain. The floor beneath you, supported by concrete and soil, retains that warmth long after the sun dips lower. There has been thoughtful analysis about why, despite clear thermal advantages, earth-sheltered homes never became the dominant global building style. Cultural preferences for visibility, status, and views often outweigh purely practical considerations. The balance between symbolism and efficiency continues to shape architecture. You recall the Arctic sod houses, the Persian yakchuls, the Viking turf halls. Each emerged from a necessity. Today, some choose earth integration by preference rather than desperation. Modern building science provides precise measurements for what earlier communities learned through experience. Thermal mass insulation values and heat transfer coefficients are calculated in laboratories, yet the core insight remains familiar. You walk through the rear hallway where the wall is entirely backed by soil. It feels steady and cool to the touch. Even as outside temperatures fluctuate between day and night, the interior changes gradually. Green roofs, earth berms, and subterranean garages appear increasingly in contemporary design discussions. Urban planners experiment with partially underground public spaces that conserve energy while reducing visual impact. Researchers in sustainable architecture often cite historical precedents when advocating for these approaches. The lineage is clear. Ancient pit houses and modern earth homes share a common logic. You step outside and feel the crisp winter air on your face. The house behind you sits quietly in the hillside, its presence understated. The lesson of underground architecture did not vanish with the arrival of modern heating systems. It persists, reinterpreted through new materials and technologies. There is something grounding about a home that draws warmth not only from fuel but from the steady mass of earth. It feels less combative, less dependent on constant energy input. You stand on the snowy slope and imagine future winters shaped by changing climates and evolving technology. Perhaps the ancient instinct to descend slightly into the ground will gain renewed relevance. Across time, the partnership between humanity and soil has proven resilient. Whether carved with bone tools or formed with reinforced concrete, the principle remains consistent. You brush snow from your coat and take one last look at the hillside dwelling. Beneath layers of earth and modern insulation, it rests in quiet composure, echoing solutions first discovered thousands of years ago. Winter continues to sweep across landscapes old and new, and still the ground waits patiently beneath, offering its steady embrace to those who choose to build with it rather than against it. You find yourself once more at the edge of winter, not in any single place, but in that quiet threshold between cold air and steady earth. Snow falls gently in the fading light. The world above ground is pale and hushed. Each breath forms a soft cloud that drifts away. You kneel and brush aside a thin layer of snow. Beneath it, the soil waits dark and patient. All along this journey across continents and centuries, you have watched people make the same choice when winter pressed too hard. They stepped downward. You imagine descending again into one of those shelters. Perhaps it is a pit house on a frozen plain, perhaps a turf hall in a northern fjord, perhaps a cellar beneath a medieval street. The form matters less now than the feeling. As you step inside, the wind fades. The air changes. It is not tropical warmth. It is something quieter, a steadiness that replaces sharp fluctuation with gentle moderation. Archaeological research across multiple regions has demonstrated that semi-subterranean structures consistently offered measurable thermal advantages in cold climates. Soil and stone slow the movement of heat. They resist rapid change. This principle, observed in countless excavations and reconstructions, underpins the survival of communities through long winters. You sit on a low bench carved from earth or stone. Firelight flickers softly. Outside, frost spreads across fields and rooftops. Inside, temperature declines slowly, not abruptly. There is a long-standing discussion among environmental historians about how much these underground strategies reduced winter mortality. Precise numbers are difficult to establish. Climate record settlement patterns and burial data offer clues, but not complete certainty. Still, the repeated investment of labour into digging, lining and insulating suggests that the benefits were tangible and valued. You close your eyes and picture children huddled in an Arctic sod house, elders gathered in a Viking turf hall, monks descending into vaulted undercrofts, frontier families stepping into root cellars to preserve their harvest. Across eras, the same instinct unfolds. One small yet evocative detail appears in many descriptions of earth-sheltered homes. Visitors often remark on the sudden hush upon entering. Sound is absorbed by layers of soil. Wind becomes distant. That acoustic softness contributes to the sense of refuge. You run your hand along the wall beside you. It is firm and cool, yet not hostile. The earth does not flare or flicker like flame. It endures. As night deepens, the shelter grows quieter still. The fire settles into embers. The warmth it produced lingers longer than it would in a thin-walled structure, exposed on all sides. You imagine the outside world continuing its restless motion. Snow drifts across open ground. Ice forms along riverbanks. Yet beneath the surface, the air holds its composure. There has been thoughtful analysis by modern scholars about how underground design reflects humility before climate rather than domination of it. Instead of battling winter with ever greater fuel consumption, these communities moderated its impact through careful integration with landscape. You breathe slowly and let your shoulders relax. The ceiling above you is low enough to feel protective, high enough to avoid confinement. The floor beneath you is steady. In this silent space, winter no longer feels like an adversary. It feels like a season passing overhead. You think of all the hands that shape such shelters. The digging, the stacking of sod, the carving of stone, the lining of walls with clay. Labour invested in resilience. Above-ground architecture often strives for visibility and height. Below ground, it seeks stability and continuity. You lie back gently and feel the warmth retained in walls and floor. It is subtle but present. Across pre-modern winters, underground architecture saved lives, not through spectacle but through moderation. It offered a margin of safety when exposure could be fatal. The snow continues to fall outside, but you no longer hear its whisper clearly. The earth absorbs the sound. Your prayers breathe. The air remains steady. The ground that seemed so hard and frozen from above reveals its hidden generosity from below. You allow your thoughts to drift softly like snow, settling into stillness. In this sheltered quiet wrapped in soil and memory, you sense the enduring partnership between humanity and earth. Winter passes, the ground remains, as the fire dims to a soft glow, and the last faint sounds of wind dissolve into silence. You feel the steady calm of the earth surrounding you. There is no urgency here, no sharp edges, just layers of soil and stone holding their quiet warmth. Imagine the seasons turning slowly above, snow melting into streams, frost giving way to green shoots. Yet even as the world changes, the ground beneath remains patient and constant. You breathe in gently. The air feels balanced, neither biting nor heavy. Your body rests easily against walls that have endured countless winters before this one. Across time, people have lowered themselves into the earth, not only for protection, but for peace. In that descent, they found steadiness. Let the image settle now. A soft chamber beneath the surface, firelight fading, snow drifting overhead without disturbance. The earth holds you, and in that calm you can let winter fade into quiet sleep. Sweet dream. Sweet dreams?